Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're building in Minecraft while I tell you about a family secret. So twisted, it makes every holiday dinner look like a performance. Sometimes the people closest to you are the best liars, and this story proves it in the worst way possible. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting the channel. Thank you so much. Your support means more than you know. This one involves a sister who supposedly died, a family who chose silence over truth, and a discovery that destroyed every relationship in its path. They thought burying the past meant it would stay buried. They were wrong. Let's dive in. When I was 8 years old, my parents sat me down in the living room and told me that my older sister had died in a car accident. I remember the way my mum's hands shook when she said it. I remember my dad staring at the floor. I remember feeling like the world had tilted sideways, and then we just never talked about her again. No photos on the mantle, no visits to a grave, no stories about what she was like or what she loved. It was like she'd been erased from existence entirely. As a kid, I learned pretty quickly that asking questions about her made my parents uncomfortable, so I stopped asking. I grew up as an only child, carrying this weird, hollow feeling that something was missing, but never quite knowing what to do about it. 20 years passed. I built a life, got a job, moved to a different city. My parents and I had a polite but distant relationship, the kind where you talk about the weather and avoid anything that matters. Then my grandmother passed away, and I volunteered to help clean out her house before we sold it. I was up in the attic going through boxes of old holiday decorations and forgotten photo albums when I found it. A shoebox tucked behind a stack of Christmas ornaments. Inside were birthday cards, dozens of them, all addressed to someone named Emma, all signed Love, your sister, Caroline, my sister, my dead sister. Except these cards were recent, like recent. The most recent one was from 3 months ago. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the box. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by cobwebs and old furniture, reading card after card. They were simple, generic birthday wishes, but they were definitely from her, and they all had return addresses from the same place, a facility called Riverside Behavioral Health Center, about 3 states away. I didn't confront my parents right away. I needed to know more first. I spent the next week doing research. Riverside was a long-term psychiatric care facility. I called them pretending to be a family member, trying to get in touch with Caroline, and after some back and forth with their admin staff, they confirmed she was a resident there. Had been for years. My sister wasn't dead. She was alive. She'd been alive this entire time. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. Everything I'd believed about my family, about my childhood, about who I was, it was all built on a lie. They'd let me grieve a sister who wasn't gone. They'd let me grow up thinking I was alone. And for what? I finally confronted my parents on a Tuesday evening. I drove to their house unannounced and walked in with the shoebox of cards. My mum was in the kitchen making dinner. My dad was watching TV. I set the box on the coffee table in front of him and said, "Want to explain this?" The color drained from my dad's face. My mum came in from the kitchen, saw the cards, and literally had to sit down. And then came the excuses, the rationalizations, the justifications that made me want to scream. Caroline had always been difficult, they said. Emotional problems, behavioral issues. When she was 16, she'd had what they called a violent episode. They wouldn't give me details, just kept saying it was bad. Really bad. Bad enough that they'd had her committed to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. And then, instead of bringing her home or getting her the help she needed, they just left her there. They told everyone she died in a car accident to avoid the stigma of having a mentally ill daughter. Imagine being this confidently wrong about every single parenting decision. My mother admitted they'd been sending her money every month, paying for her care, making sure she had what she needed. But they'd never visited. Not once in over 20 years. They'd chosen their reputation over their own daughter. They'd chosen the comfort of a simple lie over the mess of the truth. I asked if Caroline knew about me. My mum shook her head. No, they'd never told her she had a younger sibling. As far as Caroline knew, she'd been abandoned by her entire family and left to rot in a facility for 2 decades. I left their house that night and never looked back. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when I decided to drive to Riverside myself. The facility was nice enough in that institutional way that tries to hide what it really is. Lots of calming colors and soft lighting. I had to go through a whole process to be approved for a visit, but I told them I was Caroline's sister and that I'd just found out she was alive. The staff seemed surprised, which told me everything I needed to know about how often my parents had actually checked in. They brought her to a visiting room, and when she walked in, it was like looking in a mirror. She had my eyes, my nose, the same dark hair, though hers was longer and streaked with grey. She was 44 years old but looked older, worn down by years of institutionalization and abandonment. She sat down across from me, confused, guarded, and I said, "Hi, I'm your sister, and I had no idea you existed until last week." The conversation that followed was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I showed her the birthday cards. I explained what our parents had told me. I apologized for not knowing, for not finding her sooner, even though none of it was my fault. She cried. I cried. The staff had to bring us tissues. Caroline told me her side of the story. The violent episode our parents referenced. She'd had a manic episode triggered by undiagnosed bipolar disorder and had thrown a vase during an argument with our mother. That was it. No one was hurt. Nothing was broken except the vase. But our parents had used it as an excuse to have her committed, and once she was in the system, they just left her there. She'd spent her entire adult life in psychiatric facilities, convinced her family had abandoned her because she was broken and unlovable. This is where patience finally snapped. I spent the next month coordinating with the facility. Caroline's doctors said she was stable. She'd been stable for years. She was on the right medications, she attended therapy, she'd done the work. The only reason she was still there was because she had nowhere else to go and no one advocating for her release. So I became that person. I hired a lawyer, I petitioned for guardianship, I found her an apartment near me and helped her transition out of Riverside. It took time and paperwork and so many phone calls, but we did it. My sister, who'd been locked away and forgotten, finally got to start a real life. And then I told the rest of the family. I called a family meeting. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. I told them Caroline was alive. I brought her with me. I watched our relatives' faces cycle through shock and confusion and anger as they realized what my parents had done. Some of them had been at her funeral. They'd mourned her. They'd sent flowers and cards and sat through a memorial service for someone who was alive and suffering in a facility 3 states away. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's get back to how this family secret gets even darker. My parents tried to defend themselves. They tried to explain. But there's no explanation that makes it okay. There's no justification for erasing your daughter from existence because you were embarrassed. The family fractured. Some people sided with my parents, saying they'd done what they thought was best at the time. Most people didn't. Most people were horrified. Caroline and I are building a relationship now. It's slow and sometimes awkward because we're essentially strangers who happen to share DNA and trauma. But she's funny, she's smart, she's kind despite everything that was done to her. She's everything I wish I'd known growing up. My parents and I don't speak. They've tried reaching out a few times, sending emails and texts that I delete without reading. Some lies are just too big to forgive. They didn't just lie about Caroline being dead. They stole 20 years from both of us. They stole our chance to know each other, to support each other, to be sisters. And for what? So the neighbors wouldn't whisper? So they could maintain some fake image of a perfect family? Caroline recently told me she started painting. The facility had art therapy, but now she has her own space and her own supplies, and she's creating these beautiful, haunting pieces about memory and loss and finding yourself after being lost for so long. She's talking about maybe showing them in a local gallery. She's building a life that's actually hers. And me, I'm learning that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who tells the truth, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. My parents failed that test spectacularly, but Caroline and I, we're showing up for each other now, better late than never. Sometimes I think about that shoebox in my grandmother's attic, about how easily I could have missed it, how I could have gone my whole life not knowing my sister was alive. And I'm grateful for whatever twist of fate led me to find those cards, even though the truth destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. because at least now I know. At least now Caroline knows she wasn't forgotten by everyone. At least now we have a chance. But if you think discovering a hidden sibling is intense, wait until you hear what someone found living in their own home. I was 12 years old when my Aunt Carol disappeared. One day she was there, laughing at family dinner, helping me with my math homework. The next day she was gone, just vanished into thin air like something out of a bad crime podcast. The police launched a full investigation. Search parties combed through the woods behind our neighborhood. Volunteers plastered missing person flyers on every telephone pole within a 20-mile radius. My uncle was beside himself with grief, or at least that's what everyone thought at the time. He gave tearful interviews to local news stations, begging for anyone with information to come forward. Months passed, the investigation went cold. The police started using words like likely deceased and presumed dead in their reports. My family held a memorial service even though there was no body. I remember standing in that church, listening to people talk about Aunt Carol in the past tense, watching my uncle cry into a handkerchief. We mourned. We moved on. Life continued the way it does after tragedy, with that hollow space where someone used to be. 15 years later, my parents died in a car accident. I inherited the house I grew up in, the same house where I'd spent countless weekends playing in the backyard, the same house where Aunt Carol used to babysit me. The place was in rough shape. Decades of deferred maintenance had taken their toll, and I decided to do a full renovation before selling it. I hired contractors, started stripping wallpaper, ripping up old carpet. The works. One afternoon, I was up in the attic sorting through boxes of old family photos and Christmas decorations. The attic had always been creepy, one of those unfinished spaces with exposed beams and that weird smell old houses get. I was pulling down boxes when I noticed something strange tucked away in the far corner. Behind an old dresser my parents had stored up there decades ago. There were blankets, not stored blankets, folded neatly in plastic bins. These were arranged like someone had been using them, like a makeshift bed. My heart started pounding. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, moving closer. There were food wrappers scattered around. Granola bar wrappers, empty water bottles, cracker boxes. Some of them looked recent. Not 15 years old recent, but definitely not ancient either. Then I saw books from our downstairs library, books I recognized from my childhood, stacked in a small pile like someone had been reading them. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Someone had been living in our attic. Maybe they still were. That's when I heard it. A small sound, like fabric rustling. It came from behind a stack of old furniture my parents had shoved against the far wall. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of that house and call the police. But something made me freeze. Something about the sound was familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I moved the beam of my phone's flashlight toward the furniture and called out, my voice shaking. "Hello? I know someone's there." The rustling stopped. Silence. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind an old wardrobe. A woman. Thin to the point of being skeletal, with long grey hair hanging in tangled clumps around her face. She was wearing clothes that looked like they'd been pieced together from items in the house. Old sweaters and pajama pants that hung off her frame. Her eyes were wide with terror, like a cornered animal. And then I recognized her. "Aunt Carol?" The word came out as barely a whisper. It didn't seem possible. It couldn't be possible. But even emaciated, even aged 15 years beyond the last time I'd seen her, I knew those eyes. I knew that face. She started crying, not sobbing, just silent tears streaming down her hollow cheeks as she stared at me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I thought you'd never come up here. I honestly don't know how I didn't pass out right there." My aunt, who we'd held a memorial service for, who I'd mourned for 15 years, was standing in front of me, living in the attic of my childhood home, the attic of the house my parents had owned, the house they'd lived in for all those years after she'd supposedly disappeared. The questions came tumbling out. Where had she been? How was she here? What happened? But Carol just kept apologizing, kept crying, and I realized she was shaking, not just from fear, but from malnutrition, from years of living in an attic, hiding like a prisoner in her own family's home. I managed to get her downstairs, wrapped her in a clean blanket, and made her tea while my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the kettle. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to have family dinners, and slowly, haltingly, she told me everything. My uncle had been abusing her for years. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, the kind of systematic cruelty that breaks a person down piece by piece. She'd hidden it from everyone, too ashamed and terrified to tell anyone. But that night, 15 years ago, something in her had snapped. He'd come at her again, and she'd fought back, really fought back. She'd hit him with a lamp, and he'd gone down hard, blood pooling beneath his head. Carol thought she'd killed him. In her panic, convinced she'd be arrested for murder, convinced no one would believe the truth about the abuse, she'd run. But she didn't run far. She'd hidden in our attic, planning to stay just for a night or two until she could figure out what to do. She'd climbed up through the access panel in the garage, pulled herself into the crawl space, and huddled in the dark waiting for police sirens. But then my mother had come up to the attic the next morning. Carol had frozen, sure she was about to be discovered. Instead, my mother had called out softly, "Carol, are you up here?" My mother had known. She'd seen Carol climb into the attic the night before and said nothing. And when Carol had finally revealed herself, terrified and sobbing, my mother had made a decision. She'd told Carol that my uncle was alive, bruised and angry, filing a police report for assault, but alive. And then my mother had told Carol to stay hidden. "For the family," my mother had said. "We can't have this scandal. We can't have everyone knowing what happened." I felt sick listening to this. My mother, who I'd loved, who I'd mourned, had kept my aunt prisoner in our attic to avoid embarrassment, to protect the family's reputation. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Carol had stayed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. My parents had brought her food at night after I'd gone to bed. They'd given her books, blankets, and fresh clothes occasionally, but they'd never let her leave. They'd convinced her that if she came forward, my uncle would press charges, that she'd go to prison, that her life would be over. They'd convinced her that hiding was her only option, and she'd believed them. After years of abuse from my uncle, after being broken down and gaslit into thinking she deserved everything that happened to her, she'd believed that living in an attic was what she deserved. For 15 years, she'd been there, living above my head while I did homework, while I had friends over, while we celebrated holidays downstairs, sneaking down in the dead of night to use the bathroom, to grab food from the kitchen, to steal books from the shelves. My parents had facilitated all of it, had kept her secret, had let everyone believe she was dead while she rotted away in the attic. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. My uncle, the man Carol thought she'd killed, the man who'd abused her for years, was still alive, still living in their old house across town, still playing the role of the grieving widower whose wife had mysteriously vanished. He'd never been arrested, never been questioned beyond the initial investigation. He'd gotten away with everything. I called the police immediately. I didn't care about protecting the family reputation. I didn't care about any of it. Carol tried to stop me at first, still terrified after all these years, still convinced she'd be the one in trouble. But I made the call anyway. The police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers who looked as stunned as I felt when they saw Carol, when they heard her story. They were gentle with her, more gentle than she'd probably experienced in decades. They called for an ambulance, took statements, and started making calls to detectives who'd worked the original case. Within hours, they'd arrested my uncle. Turns out, when you dig into someone's past with actual motivation, patterns emerge. Other women came forward, women he'd dated after Carol's disappearance, women who'd experienced the same abuse but had been too afraid to report it. The walls came crashing down around him fast. Carol was hospitalized for severe malnutrition and a dozen other health issues that come from living in an attic for 15 years. The doctors said it was a miracle she'd survived at all. She'd been living on scraps, on whatever my parents had given her, on rainwater she'd collected from a leak in the roof. Her body had been eating itself to stay alive. The story made national news. Missing woman found alive after 15 years, hidden by her own family. The media circus was exactly what my parents had been trying to avoid, except now they weren't alive to face it. Their friends, their church community, everyone who'd known them was horrified. The perfect family image they'd worked so hard to maintain was destroyed, and they weren't even here to see it. Carol's getting help now, real help. Therapy, medical treatment, support groups for abuse survivors. She's living in a facility where she can be monitored, where she can start to rebuild some kind of life. We talk sometimes. I visit when I can, but there's a distance between us that I don't know how to bridge. How do you build a relationship with someone who's essentially a ghost? Someone who lost 15 years of their life because your parents chose reputation over humanity. My uncle's awaiting trial. The charges keep piling up. Abuse, false imprisonment, fraud for collecting life insurance money after Carol was declared legally dead. His lawyer keeps trying to make deals, but the prosecutor isn't having it. He's going to prison for a long time if there's any justice in the world. But here's what I can't reconcile. My parents, the people who raised me, who taught me right from wrong, who took me to church every Sunday and preached about compassion and honesty, kept a woman prisoner in their attic for 15 years. They fed her just enough to keep her alive, but not enough to let her really live. They let her believe she was a murderer, that she deserved to hide, that the world was better off thinking she was dead. Every memory I have of my childhood is tainted now. Every family dinner, every holiday, every moment of normalcy was built on top of Carol suffering in silence above our heads. My parents tucked me in at night and then went upstairs to bring scraps to a woman they were holding captive. They chose silence over saving her. They chose appearances over her life. I sold the house. I couldn't stand to be in it anymore. Couldn't walk past that attic door without feeling sick. Some developer bought it, probably planning to flip it, and I don't care what they do with it. Burn it down for all I care. People keep asking me if I'm angry at my parents, if I hate them for what they did. The truth is, I don't know what I feel. They're dead. I can't confront them. I can't demand answers or understanding. All I have are questions and this horrible knowledge that the people I loved most in the world were capable of something so cruel, so inhumane that I can barely comprehend it. Carol tells me she doesn't blame them, that they were scared, that they thought they were helping her. But I blame them. I blame them for every day she spent in that attic, for every year she lost, for the life she'll never get back. Sometimes I wonder if they ever felt guilty, if they ever lay in bed at night thinking about the woman in their attic, wondering if they'd made the right choice, or if they'd convinced themselves so thoroughly that they were protecting the family that they'd actually believed it, that they'd slept soundly while Carol slowly wasted away above them. I'll never know. And maybe that's the worst part of all. I bought one of those DNA test kits on a whim during a Black Friday sale. You know the kind. Spit in a tube, mail it off, find out you're 3% Scandinavian or whatever. I wasn't looking for anything life-changing. I just thought it would be fun to see my ancestry break down. Maybe connect with some distant cousins I'd never meet. The kind of thing you do when you're bored and the algorithm knows exactly what ad to show you. So I did it. Sent off my sample and forgot about it for like 6 weeks. When the results came back, I logged in expecting to see a pie chart and maybe some recommendations for European travel destinations. Instead, the first thing I saw was a notification for close family matches. My younger brother was there, which made sense. A few second cousins I vaguely recognized from family reunions, and then there was someone listed as a half-sibling, a 32-year-old woman named Maya. I stared at that screen for a solid 5 minutes trying to make it make sense. I'm 35. I have one younger brother. That's it. That's been the family structure my entire life. My parents have been married for 40 years. There's never been any talk of other kids, step-siblings, adoptions, nothing. Just me, my brother, and our aggressively normal suburban upbringing. I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe the algorithm glitched. Maybe someone with a similar genetic profile got mixed into my results. But the percentage match was too high to ignore. This wasn't some distant relative. This was someone who shared about 25% of my DNA. That's not a cousin, that's a sibling. So I did what any rational person spiraling into an identity crisis would do. I sent her a message through the platform, kept it casual. Hey, I think we might be related. Do you know anything about this? Sent it off and then immediately regretted it because what if she didn't know either? What if I just blew up her life with a random DM on her ancestry website? She responded within an hour, and she didn't seem surprised at all. She said she'd known about me her whole life. She'd been told since she was a kid that her father had another family, but her mum had made her promise never to reach out. She sent me a photo of her birth certificate. Right there, in the father's name field, was my dad's full legal name. Not a typo, not a similar name. his exact name, spelled correctly, with his signature from 33 years ago. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. My dad, the guy who coached my little league team and never missed a parent-teacher conference, had a whole other kid out there that I'd never heard about. Maya told me her mum had an affair with my dad right before he married my mum. She got pregnant, decided to keep the baby, and my dad apparently just went ahead and started his new life like nothing happened. According to Maya, her mum never asked him to be involved. She raised Maya on her own, worked 2 jobs, did everything solo. But my dad knew. He'd always known. And he just never mentioned it. Not once. Not in 35 years. I didn't know what to do with this information. I couldn't exactly bring it up at Sunday dinner like a fun anecdote. So I sat on it for a few days, trying to figure out how to even start that conversation. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just some youthful mistake he'd hidden. This was a whole human being. My sister. And I'd gone my entire life not knowing she existed. Then came the breaking point. I was going through Maya's messages again, looking at photos she'd sent, and she mentioned something offhand about the money. She said her mom had always received monthly payments from my dad, even after she got married and had her own life. It wasn't child support through the courts or anything official, just cash payments, quiet money to keep things quiet. And that's when I realized my mom had to have known. There's no way my dad was sending money to another woman for 30 years without my mum noticing. Our finances weren't separate. They had joint accounts. She would have seen it. So I called my mom. Didn't even plan what I was going to say. Just called her and asked point blank if she knew about Maya. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. She didn't deny it, didn't act surprised. She just sighed like I'd brought up something mildly inconvenient and said we needed to talk in person. That's how I knew it was worse than I thought. I drove to their house that night. My brother met me there because I'd filled him in on everything, and he was just as furious as I was. We sat down in the living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays and done all the normal family things, and demanded the truth. My dad looked like he wanted to crawl into the floor. My mum looked calm, too calm, like she'd been preparing for this conversation for decades. She admitted it. Yes, she knew about Maya. She'd known from the very beginning. My dad had told her about the affair and the pregnancy before they got married, and my mom had decided to stay with him anyway. But here's the part that made my skin crawl. She's the one who'd been managing the payments. She's the one who set up the arrangement with Maya's mum. Monthly cash deposits to keep her from ever contacting us, from ever disrupting the perfect family image my mum had worked so hard to build. She said it like it was a reasonable business decision, like paying off your husband's secret child was just smart household management. I thought that was the worst of it. I really did. But then my dad broke. Just completely fell apart. Started crying, saying he was sorry, saying he'd made so many mistakes. And that's when he said it. Maya wasn't the only one. You almost have to admire the audacity. There were 3 more. 3 more kids scattered across 2 states that I'd never heard of. A 28-year-old son in Ohio, twin daughters aged 24 in Pennsylvania, all from different women, all kept secret, all paid off by my mother to maintain the illusion of our perfect little family. My dad had apparently spent his 20s and early 30s just casually fathering children with different women and then walking away. And my mum had known about every single one. She'd known about the son in Ohio before I was even born. She'd known about the twins before my brother graduated high school. She'd been sending them money for years, decades in some cases, to keep them silent and far away from us. My brother and I just sat there in stunned silence. I didn't even know what to feel. Anger didn't seem big enough. Betrayal didn't cover it. Our entire childhood had been a performance. Every family photo, every holiday, every moment we thought was genuine had been built on this foundation of lies and hush money. My mom had spent 40 years protecting an image that was completely fake, and my dad had just let her do it because it was easier than facing what he'd done. I asked why. Why keep it secret? Why not just tell us? And my mom said, without a shred of irony, that she didn't want us growing up thinking our family was broken. She wanted us to have stability. She wanted us to have a normal life, as if paying off multiple secret siblings to stay away was somehow more normal than just being honest. The next few weeks were a blur. My brother and I reached out to the other siblings. Not all of them wanted to talk to us, which I understood. We were strangers connected by the worst parts of our parents' choices, but some of them did. Maya and I started talking regularly. The son in Ohio, his name's Eric. He was angry but willing to meet. The twins didn't want anything to do with us, and I couldn't blame them. They'd spent their whole lives being the secret. Why would they want to suddenly be part of the family that had hidden them? My relationship with my parents is pretty much non-existent now. I can't look at them the same way. Every memory feels tainted. Every story they told us about their relationship feels like a lie. My mom keeps trying to justify it, saying she did what she had to do to keep the family together. But she didn't keep the family together. She kept up an appearance. There's a difference. My dad just apologizes over and over, like sorry is supposed to fix 35 years of deception. My brother's handling it differently. He's angrier than I am, if that's even possible. He doesn't want anything to do with the other siblings. He says it's too much, that he didn't ask for this, and he's right. None of us asked for this, but I can't just pretend they don't exist now that I know. These are people who share my DNA, who grew up wondering about the family they weren't allowed to be part of. They deserved better than being treated like inconvenient secrets. So now I'm trying to build relationships with siblings I never knew existed, while processing the fact that my entire childhood was a carefully constructed lie. It's weird. It's uncomfortable. Some days I don't even know how to feel about it, but at least it's real. At least it's the truth. And after 35 years of living in a fabricated version of reality, I'll take uncomfortable truth over comfortable lies any day. They thought they could bury the past with money and silence. Turns out all it took was a $70 DNA kit and a holiday sale. I always felt like I didn't quite fit, not in a dramatic movie of the week kind of way, but in those small, nagging ways that pile up over a lifetime. My brother had my dad's nose and my mum's eyes. My sister looked like a perfect blend of both. And then there was me. Different hair texture, different build, different everything. Family photos always felt like a game of one of these things is not like the other, and I was always the odd one out. Growing up, I'd joke about it, tell people I must have been switched at birth or adopted. My mum would laugh it off, sometimes a little too quickly, and change the subject. I never pushed it. Why would I? They were my family. That was enough. But the feeling never really went away. I liked art and music while everyone else was obsessed with sports. I was introverted in a house full of extroverts. I had a temper that seemed to come out of nowhere, while everyone else in my family was calm and measured. Little things, stupid things, things that shouldn't have mattered. By the time I hit my 20s, I'd mostly made peace with being the black sheep. I had my own life, my own friends, my own identity separate from my family. I didn't need to fit their mold anymore. I was fine. Then I turned 28 and had a medical emergency that changed everything. It started with severe abdominal pain that landed me in the ER at 2 in the morning. The doctors ran tests, asked a million questions about my medical history, and eventually told me I needed emergency surgery. Standard procedure, nothing too scary, but insurance needed documentation. Specifically, they needed my birth certificate. I called my mum from the hospital and asked her to bring it. She said she'd look for it. Hours passed. She called back saying she couldn't find it, that it must be in storage somewhere, that she'd keep looking. The hospital said they could proceed without it for now, but I'd need it for the paperwork afterward. The surgery went fine. I recovered. But I still needed that birth certificate for insurance claims, and my mum kept stalling. Every time I asked, there was a new excuse. It was in a box somewhere. She'd left it at my grandmother's house. She'd look this weekend, next weekend, the weekend after that. After 3 months of excuses, I stopped asking and just went to the county records office myself. I figured it would take 10 minutes. Fill out a form, pay a fee, get a copy. Easy. The clerk handed me the document and I glanced at it while walking back to my car. That's when I froze in the middle of the parking lot, staring at a piece of paper that made no sense. The name listed wasn't the name I'd been using my entire life. It was close, but not quite right. Different middle name, and where it said mother, the name printed there wasn't my mum. It was my Aunt Linda. I stood there for a solid 5 minutes, reading and rereading the same lines, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error. Someone at the county office had pulled the wrong file. But deep down, I already knew. All those little things that never added up suddenly clicked into place, like puzzle pieces I'd been ignoring my whole life. I didn't go home. I drove straight to my Aunt Linda's house. She opened the door, saw my face, and just knew. I watched the color drain from her cheeks. She didn't ask why I was there. She just stepped aside and let me in. I put the birth certificate on her kitchen table. She looked at it and started crying. Turns out my entire life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Linda got pregnant when she was 16. The father was some guy from another school who disappeared the second he found out. My grandmother, who was deeply religious and obsessed with the family's reputation, lost her mind. Having an unwed teenage mother in the family was unacceptable, an embarrassment, a stain on their good name, so they came up with a plan. Linda would have the baby in secret, and her older sister, the woman I'd called Mom my entire life, would adopt me and raise me as her own. Linda would play the role of the fun aunt. Everyone would keep the secret. Problem solved. Except it wasn't solved. It was just buried. Linda told me she'd wanted to tell me the truth so many times over the years. When I was 10 and asked why I didn't look like anyone else. When I was 16 and we had that bonding conversation about first loves. When I graduated college. When I got engaged. Every major milestone in my life she'd thought about coming clean. But every time my grandmother threatened to cut her off completely. Financially, emotionally. The whole family would turn on her if she broke the pact. So she stayed quiet and watched from the sidelines as someone else raised her daughter. I asked if my dad knew. She nodded. He'd known from the beginning. Everyone knew. My brother and sister didn't, but every adult in my family had been in on this secret for 28 years. I left Linda's house and drove to my parents' place. The woman I'd called Mom my whole life was in the kitchen making dinner like it was any other Tuesday. I put the birth certificate on the counter. She looked at it, looked at me, and sighed like I'd just told her I'd gotten a parking ticket. That reaction might have been the worst part. No shock, no panic, just resignation. Like she'd been waiting for this conversation for decades and was almost relieved it was finally happening. She tried to explain, tried to justify it, said they'd done it to protect me. To give me a stable home, to avoid the stigma of being born to a teenage mother. Said Linda wasn't ready to be a parent and she was, so it made sense. I asked why they never told me. She said they'd planned to, eventually, but there was never a right time. Then years passed, and it felt easier to just let it be. Let me live my life without the confusion and pain of knowing the truth. This is where patience finally snapped. I asked her if she understood what she'd stolen from me. Not just the truth about my birth, but my entire sense of identity. Every moment I'd felt like I didn't belong, she could have explained it. Every time I wondered why I was so different, she had the answer and chose to keep it from me. She started crying, saying she'd only wanted what was best for me, that she loved me like her own daughter. That biology didn't matter, and maybe that would have been enough if she'd told me when I was old enough to understand, if she'd given me the choice to build a relationship with my biological mother. But she didn't. She made that choice for me and let me spend 28 years feeling like a stranger in my own family. I left without saying another word. Over the next few weeks, I had long conversations with Linda. Heard her side of the story. Learned about the guy who got her pregnant. About how scared she'd been. About how she'd held me exactly once before my grandmother took me away and handed me to her sister. She showed me a box she'd kept hidden in her closet. Baby clothes she'd bought but never got to use. A journal she'd written to me over the years. Entries she'd never had the courage to share. Photos she'd taken when she'd visit, pretending to be the fun aunt while dying inside. And here's where it gets absurd. Our family has this big annual reunion every summer. Everyone comes. It's this whole production with rented pavilions and matching t-shirts, and my grandmother giving speeches about family values and staying connected. I decided that was the perfect venue to share my news. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, just showed up with a folder full of documents, birth certificate, adoption papers I'd requested, hospital records, everything. When my grandmother started her speech about the importance of honesty and integrity in families, I stood up and asked if I could share something. She looked annoyed but handed me the microphone. I told everyone everything, read directly from the birth certificate, explained the whole arrangement, watched faces go from confused to shocked to horrified as I laid out the timeline of lies. My grandmother tried to interrupt, tried to take the microphone back. I turned away from her and kept talking. I showed them the journal Linda had kept, read a few entries out loud, let everyone hear exactly how much pain this secret had caused. The family fractured in real time. Some people immediately came to Linda's defense, saying she'd been a kid and had no choice. Others turned on my grandmother for orchestrating the whole thing. A few supported my mum, saying she'd raised me well and that should count for something. But there was also a group, mostly older relatives, who thought I'd crossed a line, that some things should stay private, that I'd humiliated the family by airing our dirty laundry in front of everyone, that I should have kept quiet and dealt with it privately instead of making a scene. My grandmother stood up and called me ungrateful, said everything they'd done was to give me a better life and I'd repaid them with betrayal. I handed her back the microphone and walked out. Linda followed me. So did a few cousins who'd apparently been sick of the family's obsession with keeping up appearances. That was 4 months ago. I'm building a relationship with Linda now. She's asked me to call her by her first name because Mum still feels complicated, and I'm fine with that. We're taking it slow, getting to know each other as adults, figuring out what our relationship looks like when it's not built on lies. The woman who raised me has tried to reach out. Emails, texts, letters. She wants to talk, wants me to understand her perspective, wants forgiveness. I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe I never will be. The thing that kills me isn't even the lie itself. It's that she watched me struggle with feeling different my entire childhood and never once thought I deserved the truth. She chose her comfort over my identity. My brother and sister have been supportive, which helps. They're angry too. Angry they were lied to. Angry our whole family dynamic was built on something fake. Some of the relatives who thought I should have stayed quiet have stopped speaking to me entirely. I'm fine with that. If their love was conditional on me playing along with their lies, I don't need it. Linda and I went to coffee last week, just the two of us. She told me about my biological father, showed me pictures. He apparently has no idea I exist, and she's not sure if she wants to track him down or leave it alone. I told her that's her choice to make, and I'll support whatever she decides. It's strange building a relationship with your mother when you're almost 30, but it's also kind of freeing. We don't have years of baggage and resentment. We're starting fresh. The family reunion is coming up again next month. I'm not going. Linda's not going either. We're planning our own thing instead. Just us, maybe a few of the cousins who chose honesty over appearances. My grandmother sent me a letter saying she expects an apology before the reunion. She's still waiting. When my father passed away, he left behind a modest estate, nothing extravagant, but enough to give each of his 3 kids a comfortable cushion. A house that had been in the family for decades, some investment accounts, life insurance, the usual. He'd been meticulous about his will too. Everything split 3 ways, equal shares for me, my brother Daniel, and my sister Rebecca. Clean, fair, no room for arguments. Or so I thought. Daniel volunteered to be the executor. At the time, it made sense. He was the oldest, had a business degree, and frankly, neither Rebecca nor I wanted to deal with the paperwork. We were grieving. The last thing we needed was to navigate probate court and estate taxes. So we said yes. We trusted him. Why wouldn't we? He was our brother. The first couple of months, everything seemed normal. Daniel kept us updated. Probate was moving slowly, he said. The courts were backed up. There were some tax issues to sort out. Standard stuff. Or at least it sounded standard to people who'd never dealt with this before. Rebecca and I nodded along. We had our own lives to get back to. Jobs, families, responsibilities. We figured Daniel had it under control. Then 3 months became 4. 4 became 5. Every time I asked for a timeline, Daniel had a new excuse. The appraiser was delayed. The bank needed more documentation. One of Dad's old business partners had filed a claim against the estate. It was always something. And honestly, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my brother wasn't lying to my face while our father's body was barely cold in the ground. But by month 6, my gut was screaming at me that something was off. I started asking more pointed questions. Where exactly was the money? What were these claims he kept mentioning? Could I see the paperwork? Daniel got defensive. He accused me of not trusting him, of making his job harder, of being impatient. He said I was disrespecting Dad's memory by questioning the process. That one stung, and I think he knew it would. That's when I hired a lawyer. I didn't tell Daniel, I didn't tell Rebecca. I just quietly reached out to an estate attorney and explained the situation. She listened, took notes, and then said something that made my blood run cold. 6 months is a long time for a straightforward estate. Too long. She said we needed to do some digging. What we found was so much worse than I'd imagined. Daniel hadn't just been stalling. He'd been systematically draining the estate from the moment Dad died. The lawyer pulled records, filed motions, and within 2 weeks, we had enough to see the shape of what he'd done. He'd forged documents to create fake debts that the estate supposedly owed. He'd set up shell companies with names that sounded legitimate, then transferred assets to those companies as if they were creditors. He'd even faked invoices for services that were never rendered. Legal fees, maintenance costs, appraisal fees, all of it going to accounts he controlled. And the money? Nearly $800,000. Gone. I felt sick, not just because of the amount, though that was staggering, but because this was my brother, the guy I'd grown up with, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, and he'd been robbing us blind while pretending to grieve. The lawyer said we needed to act fast before he moved more assets offshore or dissolved the shell companies. So we filed a lawsuit, emergency injunctions, forensic accountants, the whole 9 yards. I was terrified, not just of losing the money, but of what this would do to our family. Rebecca still didn't know. I hadn't told her yet because I knew how she'd react. She hated conflict. She'd want to sweep it under the rug, keep the peace, pretend everything was fine. But there was no pretending anymore. During the discovery phase, the forensic accountants found something even more disturbing. Daniel hadn't just started this after Dad died. He'd been planning it for years. The shell companies were registered 2 years before Dad even got sick. He'd been setting up the infrastructure, waiting for the right moment, which meant he'd been circling Dad's estate like a vulture, just biding his time. You almost have to admire the audacity, except you don't, because it's one of the most disgusting things a person can do. I called an emergency family meeting. Rebecca flew in from across the state. Daniel showed up looking calm, almost smug, like he thought he could talk his way out of this. I didn't even give him the chance. I laid it all out on the table. Literally. Bank statements, copies of the forged documents, the registration records for his fake companies, wire transfer receipts. Everything. Rebecca's face went white. She kept looking between the papers and Daniel, like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Daniel, to his credit, didn't try to deny it at first. He just sat there staring at the evidence. Then, when he finally spoke, he tried to justify it. He said Dad had verbally promised him more. Said he'd done more for Dad in his final years than either of us had. Said he deserved a larger share because he'd sacrificed his career to take care of the estate. It was insulting. Not just because it was a lie, but because he actually seemed to believe it. Like his entitlement was so deeply ingrained that he'd convinced himself he wasn't stealing. He was just taking what was rightfully his. I told him the evidence didn't lie. The forged signatures, the fake companies, the transfers. None of that was a verbal promise. That was fraud. Rebecca started crying, not because she was sad, but because she was angry, angrier than I'd ever seen her. She asked Daniel how he could do this, how he could look us in the eye and lie for 6 months. He didn't have an answer, or maybe he did, but it wouldn't have mattered. The damage was done. We turned everything over to the authorities. Within a week, Daniel was arrested. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The prosecutors said it was one of the most clear-cut cases they'd seen. He'd left a paper trail a mile long. The arrogance was his downfall all along. The legal process took months, but we recovered most of the money. Not all of it. Some had been spent, some was tied up in accounts we couldn't access, but the bulk of it came back. The estate was finally settled. Rebecca and I got what Dad had intended for us. But here's the thing. Rebecca won't talk to me anymore. She blames me for pressing charges. She says I destroyed the family, that I should have handled it privately, that airing our dirty laundry in court was unnecessary. She thinks I should have just taken the money back and let Daniel go. Kept it quiet. Kept up appearances. I told her that wasn't an option. That what Daniel did was a crime, and crimes have consequences. That if we let him get away with it, he'd just do it to someone else. But she didn't want to hear it. She cut me off, blocked my number, hasn't spoken to me since the trial ended. So now I have the inheritance Dad wanted me to have, but I've lost both my siblings. One's in prison. The other won't look at me, and I'm left wondering if I made the right choice. Logically, I know I did. Morally, I know I did. But emotionally, it's complicated. Some people value keeping up appearances over justice, and I guess my sister is one of them. Maybe she always was, and I just didn't see it until now. But stolen money isn't the only way families betray each other. Sometimes they build entire secret lives. My dad was always traveling for work, construction projects in different cities, he'd say. Sometimes he'd be gone for a week, sometimes two. We were used to it. Mom never complained. It was just how things were. He had his business and it required him to move around. We accepted it. Then one Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on our door. I answered it because I was closest to the entryway. Standing there was a woman I'd never seen before, mid-40s, with two teenagers flanking her sides. She looked exhausted, angry, and she asked if this was the residence of David Mitchell. My dad. She was asking for my dad. I said yes, confused, and she asked if she could come in. Something in her tone made me step aside. My mum came into the hallway, saw the strangers in our entryway, and froze. The woman looked at my mum, then at me, then back at my mum, and said 6 words that detonated our entire reality. I'm Jennifer. I'm David's wife. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour. My mom just stared. I stared. The two teenagers looked uncomfortable but defiant, like they'd been dragged into something they didn't want to be part of but were committed to seeing through. Jennifer pulled out her phone and started showing us photos. Wedding photos, family photos, photos of my dad with her and those 2 kids at birthday parties, holidays, graduations, photos that spanned years. My mum sat down on the stairs. I think her legs just gave out. Jennifer explained that she'd found our address in my dad's phone. She'd been suspicious for months. He traveled for work constantly, just like he did with us, and she'd started noticing inconsistencies in his stories. So she'd gone through his phone while he was in the shower and found everything. Text messages to my mum, photos of our family, calendar events that conflicted with what he'd told her. She'd driven 6 hours to confront us because she wanted the truth. And here's the thing, she genuinely thought we were the affair. She thought she was the real wife and we were the secret family he'd been keeping on the side. She'd brought her kids as backup, as witnesses, as proof that she was the legitimate one. Except my parents had been married for 23 years. I was 21. My younger brother was 17. We had photo albums and legal documents and a whole lifetime of evidence that we were very much a real family. Jennifer's face went white when my mom showed her the marriage certificate, because Jennifer had one too, dated 2 years after my parents' wedding. Bigamy. My dad had committed actual bigamy. The man had been living a complete double life for 15 years. 2 wives, 2 families, 2 separate existences in different states. He had a construction business that required travel, which was true, but he'd weaponized that truth to justify his constant absences from both homes. When he was with us, he told Jennifer he was on a job site. When he was with Jennifer, he told us the same thing. And somehow, for a decade and a half, he'd kept it all running. You almost have to admire the audacity. Almost. If it wasn't so spectacularly cruel. We called him, right there in the living room with Jennifer and her kids standing there. He answered cheerfully, asking what was up, and my mom just said, "Jennifer is here, in our living room, with her children. Want to explain that?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then he hung up. He didn't come home that night, or the next night. He went completely dark, didn't answer calls or texts from anyone. Jennifer stayed in a hotel nearby because she wasn't driving 6 hours back until she had answers. My mom was catatonic. I was trying to hold everything together while also processing the fact that my entire childhood had been a performance. Then came the breaking point. 3 days after Jennifer showed up, my dad finally called my mom back, and that's when he admitted there was a third woman. Not a wife this time, he said, as if that made it better. Just a long-term girlfriend in another state. She had a 5-year-old daughter. He'd been seeing her for 6 years, 3 families, 3 separate lives. One man who apparently had enough energy and organizational skills to maintain this absolute circus of deception for years. My mum started laughing when he told her, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming or breaking down completely. She asked him how, just how did he keep track of it all? How did he remember which lies he'd told to whom? How did he sleep at night? He didn't have good answers. He kept saying he'd never meant for it to go this far, that it had started small and spiraled, that he loved all of us, like that meant anything, like love was supposed to excuse the systematic destruction of multiple families. Jennifer filed for divorce immediately. She also filed criminal charges for bigamy, which is actually illegal in most states. My mom filed for divorce too. And then I did something I'd never imagined doing. I reached out to the third woman. Her name was Michelle. She had no idea about me, my mum, or Jennifer. She thought my dad was a bachelor who traveled for work. When I told her the truth, she threw up, literally threw up. Then she called him and screamed at him for 20 minutes while I listened on speakerphone. Her daughter, who my dad had been playing father figure to for years, wasn't even his biological kid. He just inserted himself into their lives and played house when it was convenient. The three of us, my mum, Jennifer, and Michelle, ended up meeting. It was surreal. We were all victims of the same man's pathological need to live multiple lives. We compared notes, we built timelines, we figured out how he'd manage the logistics. He'd use work trips to rotate between us. He'd set up separate bank accounts. He'd maintained different phone numbers. He'd created entire personas tailored to what each of us wanted in a partner. Michelle's lawyers, Jennifer's lawyers, and my mum's lawyers started working together. They built cases, subpoenaed financial records, uncovered years of fraud and deception. My dad had been funneling money between accounts, claiming business expenses that were actually child support or mortgage payments for his other families. He'd lied on legal documents. He'd committed tax fraud. The list went on. And here's where it gets absurd. When everything came out publicly, when the legal system got involved and people started digging, they found discrepancies that suggested there might be a fourth situation somewhere. Nothing concrete, but enough red flags that investigators are still looking. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they found an entire other family in Canada or something. My dad's business collapsed. His reputation was destroyed. He's facing criminal charges for bigamy, fraud, and a bunch of other things I don't fully understand. Both wives, well, ex-wives now, are getting divorce settlements. Michelle is suing him for emotional damages and fraud. He's probably going to jail. And me? I'm trying to build a relationship with my half-siblings. Jennifer's kids are 18 and 16. They're angry and confused and dealing with their own trauma from this. Michelle's daughter is only 5, so she doesn't fully understand yet, but that's going to be its own nightmare when she's older. We're all casualties of one man's selfish need to have everything he wanted without consequences. The worst part is that he was good at it. He was a good dad when he was around, attentive, loving, involved. He showed up to my soccer games and helped with homework and gave advice about college. He did the same for Jennifer's kids. He played tea party with Michelle's daughter. He compartmentalized so thoroughly that each version of him was genuine in the moment. That's what makes it so hard to process. The father I knew wasn't a lie exactly. He was just 1/3 of a much bigger, much darker truth. Trust is basically impossible now. I second-guess everything. Every relationship feels like it could be hiding some massive secret. My mom is in therapy. Jennifer is in therapy. Michelle is in therapy. I'm in therapy. The kids are in therapy. We're all just trying to figure out how to exist in a world where someone we loved turned out to be a completely different person than we thought. My half-siblings and I meet up sometimes. We get coffee or go to movies. It's weird and awkward because we're strangers connected only by shared trauma and genetics. But we're trying. We figured if he was going to blow up all our lives, the least we could do was salvage something from the wreckage. I asked my mum once if there were signs, if she'd suspected anything. She said there were little things that didn't add up sometimes, but she'd trusted him. She'd believed his explanations because why wouldn't she? You don't marry someone expecting them to maintain secret families across state lines. You don't build a life with someone while assuming they're doing the same thing with 2 other people simultaneously. The trial is coming up soon. I'll probably have to testify. So will my mum. So will Jennifer and Michelle. We'll all sit in a courtroom and detail exactly how he destroyed us. And then he'll go to jail, or he won't, and either way our lives will never be what they were. Sometimes I wonder if he regrets it, if he lies awake at night thinking about what he's lost, or if he's just angry he got caught. I don't know which answer would be worse. Identity theft takes many forms, and sometimes it happens within your own family. It started small, little things that didn't quite add up but weren't alarming enough to investigate. A friend mentioned running into me at a coffee shop I'd never been to. Another asked about a concert I'd supposedly attended but had zero memory of. I laughed it off at first, figured they had me confused with someone else. Mistaken identity happens, right? Then the photos started appearing. I was scrolling through Instagram one night when a mutual acquaintance tagged me in a post. Except it wasn't my account. It was a profile using my name, my photos, my face. The bio was slightly different. The posts were things I'd never shared, but it was definitely my pictures. Photos from my actual Instagram, my Facebook, even some I'd only sent to close friends. I reported the account immediately, sent screenshots to Instagram support, figured it was some random creep catfishing people. It happens all the time online. The account got taken down within a few days, and I thought that was the end of it. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a credit card company congratulating me on my approval for a new card. I told them I hadn't applied for anything. The representative seemed confused, asked me to verify some information, and that's when my stomach dropped. Someone had applied for a credit card in my name, used my social security number, my address, everything. And they'd been approved. I immediately froze my credit and started digging, pulled my credit report and found 2 other cards I'd never opened, thousands of dollars in charges I'd never made. My credit score had tanked. I filed police reports, contacted the fraud departments, started the nightmare process of proving I was actually me and that someone had stolen my identity. While I was dealing with the financial mess, more weird things kept happening. People kept mentioning seeing me places I hadn't been. A guy I vaguely knew from college messaged me asking why I'd been ignoring his texts. I had no idea what he was talking about. He sent me screenshots of conversations he'd been having with me for 3 months, flirty messages, plans to meet up, an entire relationship with someone using my face and my name. This is where patience finally snapped. I started investigating seriously, tracked down every fake account, every strange interaction, every piece of the puzzle. And that's when I found her. My cousin Jessica, sweet, quiet Jessica, who I'd grown up with, who came to every family gathering, who I'd never had a single problem with in my entire life. She'd created multiple social media profiles using my photos. She'd been going out in public pretending to be me, meeting people, having conversations, living an entire alternate life as me. She'd even started dating that guy from college, telling him she was me, going on dates with him while he genuinely believed he was in a relationship with me. The credit cards, those were hers too. She'd accessed my personal information through our grandmother's house. Our whole family kept important documents there. Social security cards, birth certificates, the works. Grandma's filing system from like 1987. Jessica had volunteered to help organize things a year ago, and she'd just helped herself to everything she needed to become me. When I finally connected all the dots, I sat in my apartment staring at the evidence folder on my laptop, trying to wrap my head around it. This wasn't some stranger on the internet. This was family. This was someone I'd shared holidays with, someone I trusted, and she'd been systematically stealing my identity for over a year. I confronted her first before going to the police. Wanted to give her a chance to explain maybe, or maybe I just needed to hear her say it. I showed up at her apartment with printouts of everything, the fake profiles, the credit applications, screenshots of her pretending to be me. She didn't deny it, just stared at me with this weird blank expression and then said, "I just wanted to know what it felt like to be you." I almost laughed. "What? You've always had the perfect life," she said, like that explained anything. "Perfect family, perfect job, perfect everything. I just wanted to try it on for a while. See what it was like." The audacity was genuinely impressive. I told her she had 24 hours to come clean to the family and turn herself in, or I'd do it for her. She cried, begged me not to ruin her life, promised she'd pay everything back. But here's the thing about identity theft. You can't just pay it back and make it go away. She'd destroyed my credit. She'd created fake relationships in my name. She'd made people think I was someone I wasn't. The damage went way beyond money. She didn't turn herself in, so I gathered everything, every fake profile, every credit card statement, every message log. I even tracked down the guy she'd been dating and got his testimony. He was horrified when I explained that the person he'd been seeing wasn't actually me, that she'd been impersonating me the entire time. He gave me copies of all their messages, photos they'd taken together where she was literally pretending to be me. Our family has this big annual Christmas party every year. Everyone comes, aunts, uncles, cousins, the works. It's this huge gathering at my grandmother's house with dinner and presents and the whole traditional setup. I decided that would be the perfect venue for my presentation. I showed up early and asked if I could set up a slideshow of family photos on the TV, said I'd put together a little retrospective. My grandmother thought it was sweet. Everyone gathered around after dinner, expecting some wholesome trip down memory lane. Instead, they got a comprehensive breakdown of how Jessica had been stealing my identity for over a year. I'd organized everything chronologically, started with the fake social media accounts, showed side-by-side comparisons of my real profiles and her fake ones using my photos, then the credit card applications with forged signatures, then screenshots of her pretending to be me in conversations, including the ones with her boyfriend who thought he was dating me. I even included testimony from people she'd met in person while claiming to be me. The room went completely silent except for my voice narrating the presentation. Jessica's face went from red to white to green. She tried to leave, but her mum blocked the door. My grandmother looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. When I finished, I pulled up the police reports I'd already filed and the evidence I'd submitted. Then I looked directly at Jessica and said, "The police will probably be contacting you soon." I gave them everything. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Jessica's parents started yelling at her. My parents started yelling at her parents for not raising her better. Other relatives were demanding explanations. Jessica tried to defend herself, kept saying she didn't mean for it to go this far, that she just wanted to feel special for once. And here's where it gets absurd. Some family members actually took her side, said I was being too harsh, that family should forgive family, that publicly humiliating her at Christmas was cruel. My own aunt suggested I was showing off by having a life good enough that someone wanted to steal it. I just stood there listening to people excuse literal identity theft and fraud because we shared a bloodline, because apparently stealing someone's entire identity, ruining their credit, and impersonating them for a year is totally fine as long as you're related. Jessica was arrested 2 days after Christmas, charged with identity theft, fraud, and forgery. The evidence was overwhelming. She eventually pleaded guilty as part of a deal, got probation, community service, and had to pay restitution for the financial damage. The criminal record, though, that's permanent. The guy she'd been dating, he was mortified, apologized profusely even though none of it was his fault. He'd been catfished by someone using my real face and real information. We actually became friends after everything settled down. He helped testify in the criminal case. I spent months fixing my credit, closing fake accounts, reclaiming my digital identity, changed all my passwords, locked down my social media, put alerts on everything. The financial damage was eventually resolved, but the violation of it all, that took longer to process. The family split pretty definitively. About half think I did the right thing. The other half think I should have handled it privately, that I was vindictive for exposing her publicly and pressing charges. But here's what they don't seem to get. She didn't just take my credit card number. She took my face, my name, my identity. She walked around as me, had relationships as me, made decisions that affected my reputation as me. That's not something you handle with a quiet conversation and a promise to do better. My grandmother eventually apologized for not securing the family documents better. She felt responsible even though Jessica was a grown adult who made a choice to steal and commit fraud. We moved all the important paperwork to a safety deposit box after that. Jessica and I obviously don't speak anymore. Last I heard, she moved to a different state to start over, which is ironic considering she spent a year trying to be me instead of being herself. Some of the relatives who defended her have tried to rebuild bridges with me, saying I was right, but they were just trying to keep the peace. I'm cordial at family functions, but the trust is gone. The weirdest part, I still occasionally get messages from people asking if I remember meeting them at random places, and I have to explain that no, that was someone pretending to be me, and yes, it's a long story. The digital footprint of her impersonation lasted way longer than the actual crimes. I learned that family doesn't mean automatic trust, and that some violations are too big to sweep under the rug just because you share DNA. Jessica wanted to feel what it was like to be me, and now she gets to feel what it's like to be a convicted felon with a destroyed reputation. She literally created her own nightmare by trying to steal mine. Betrayal from family is one thing, but what happens when your partner's lies unravel in the worst possible way? My fiancé Jake traveled for work constantly. Every week, sometimes twice a week, he'd pack his sleek black roller bag and head out for what he called consulting gigs. Tech consulting specifically, which apparently required a lot of FaceTime with clients across the region. I never really questioned it. He worked for a reputable firm, he always came home when he said he would, and honestly, the relationship felt solid. We'd been together for 2 years, engaged for 8 months, and planning a wedding for the following spring. I was completely blindsided by what I discovered. Like, not even a hint of suspicion until everything unraveled in the most absurd way possible. It started because I wanted to do something nice. Jake had been stressed about a big project, working late nights before his trips, and I thought surprising him at his hotel with his favorite takeout and maybe a bottle of wine would be romantic. He was supposed to be in Columbus for 3 days, staying at the Marriott downtown. I'd heard him mention it on the phone with his boss, so I took a half day off work, drove the 2 hours to Columbus, walked into that hotel lobby feeling like girlfriend of the year, and asked the front desk for Jake Morrison's room number. The desk clerk checked her computer, frowned, and checked again. No one by that name was registered. I figured maybe he'd checked in under the company name, or there was some mix-up, so I called his cell. It went straight to voicemail. That's when the first thread of unease started to pull. Jake always answered when I called. Always. He was weirdly good about it, even in meetings. He'd step out or at least text me back immediately. I sat in the hotel lobby for 20 minutes trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe he'd switched hotels last minute. Maybe his company booked under a different name. Maybe I'd gotten the city wrong. But then I remembered we had location sharing turned on through Find My Friends. We'd set it up months ago, one of those relationship transparency things that felt sweet at the time. So I opened the app. His little icon wasn't in Columbus. It was 40 minutes outside the city, in a residential area I'd never heard of. Not near any office buildings or corporate parks, just houses. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of it. Why would he be at someone's house for a business trip? Maybe it was a client's home office? Maybe the meeting had moved? I texted him again. No response. Here's where I made the decision that changed everything. I could have driven home. I could have waited for him to call back with an explanation. But something in my gut told me to drive to that location. So I did. I plugged the address into my GPS and drove to a quiet suburban neighborhood with neat lawns and sidewalks where kids were riding bikes. The kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happens. Jake's car was parked in the driveway of a 2-story colonial. I sat in my car across the street, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do. Then the front door opened and Jake walked out, laughing, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Not his work clothes, casual clothes. He walked back inside, leaving the door slightly open. I watched for another 10 minutes, paralyzed by confusion and growing dread. Finally, I got out of my car and walked up to that door. I knocked. A woman answered, mid-30s, blonde, pretty, wearing yoga pants and a sweater, and on her left hand was an engagement ring. Not just any ring, my ring. The exact same setting, the same oval diamond, the same delicate band. I knew because I'd spent weeks picking it out with Jake. I'd sent him photos of the exact one I wanted. The woman looked at me, confused but polite. "Can I help you?" I couldn't form words. I just stared at her ring. She noticed me staring and smiled, holding up her hand. "Oh, do you like it? My fiancé just surprised me with it a few months ago." That's when Jake appeared behind her. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched him freeze in the doorway like a deer in headlights. The woman turned to look at him, then back at me, and you could see the exact moment she started piecing it together. "Who is this?" she asked Jake, her voice already shaking. I held up my left hand, showing my identical ring. "I'm his fiancé. Who are you?" Her name was Melissa, and she'd been engaged to Jake for 8 months, the exact same amount of time I had. Jake had been living a complete double life, using his supposed business trips to alternate between us. 1 week with me, 1 week with her, back and forth like a demented pendulum. The three of us stood there on that porch, and Jake tried to explain. Or rather, he tried to lie his way out, but it was too late. Melissa and I weren't having it. We both started asking questions, comparing answers, and every single thing matched. He'd told us the same stories about his childhood. He'd taken us to the same restaurants in different cities. He'd given us the same gifts for our birthdays, just weeks apart. He'd even proposed to both of us at scenic overlooks, using nearly identical speeches about how we were his forever. The level of planning this required was almost impressive in a deeply disturbing way. Jake finally gave up trying to talk and just left, got in his car and drove away while Melissa and I stood there in shock. We went inside and spent the next 4 hours comparing notes like detectives piecing together a crime. Photos, text messages, calendar events, everything. She showed me the wedding venue she'd booked. I showed her mine. They were in different states scheduled 3 weeks apart. He'd been planning to marry both of us, like, actually go through with it, commit bigamy and just hope it somehow worked out. This is where it gets absurd. Melissa found his calendar on their shared iPad. He'd color-coded us. I was blue. She was green. He had our schedules mapped out months in advance, making sure we never overlapped, that he never accidentally called one of us by the other's name because he'd noted which of us he was supposed to be with on which days. There were reminders like M's mum's birthday and Jay's work event. He'd systematized his lies. We decided right then that we weren't just going to walk away quietly. Jake needed to face consequences, real ones, not just 2 broken engagements he could spin into some story about cold feet. So we planned. Melissa knew his bachelor party was coming up in 2 weeks. His friends and family were all going to be there, people who thought he was this stand-up guy, this successful consultant with a bright future. We coordinated with his brother, who we brought into the loop after showing him the evidence. His brother was horrified and immediately agreed to help. The night of the bachelor party, Jake thought he was walking into a room full of his closest friends at a rented event space. Instead, he walked into an intervention. Melissa and I were both there, sitting at the front of the room. His brother had set up a projector. We'd put together a presentation, timelines of his lies, screenshots of identical text messages sent to both of us, receipts from the same gifts purchased twice, photos of both engagement rings. We laid it all out while his friends and family watched in stunned silence. Jake tried to leave. His brother blocked the door. One of his friends, someone he'd known since college, stood up and said he was disgusted. Jake's dad started crying. His mum left the room. It was brutal and messy and exactly what he deserved. Here's the thing about people who live double lives. They're so confident in their own cleverness that they never think about what happens when it all falls apart. Jake had convinced himself he could pull this off indefinitely. That he'd somehow managed 2 wives, 2 families, 2 entire separate existences. The ego required to believe that is staggering. His family disowned him pretty much immediately. His mum called me the next day to apologize, crying about how she'd raised him better than this, how she couldn't believe what he'd done. His brother offered to help Melissa and me with anything we needed. Most of Jake's friends cut contact. A few reached out to apologize for not seeing the signs, though I'm not sure what signs they could have caught. Jake was meticulous. Melissa and I took our engagement rings to a jeweler and sold them both, split the money down the middle. It wasn't about the cash, really. It was about taking something he'd used to lie to us and turning it into something that actually benefited us. We still talk occasionally, bonded by the weirdest shared trauma imaginable. She's dating someone new now. I'm taking a break from relationships entirely, trying to figure out how I missed something so massive. People keep asking me if there were red flags. Honestly, not really. Jake was good. He was attentive when he was around, never suspicious or evasive in obvious ways. He just had an entire second life that he kept perfectly compartmentalized. The only mistake he made was underestimating what would happen when 2 smart, angry women decided to compare notes. Jake tried to contact both of us a few times after everything blew up. Emails full of apologies and excuses about being confused and making mistakes. Melissa and I blocked him everywhere. Last I heard, he'd moved to a different state and was working some entry-level job because his old firm fired him once word got around. Turns out corporate America doesn't love employees who commit fraud in their personal lives either. The wedding venues gave us both full refunds once we explained the situation. Small victories. I'm still processing the whole thing. Honestly, 2 years of my life spent with someone who was fundamentally lying about who he was. It's the kind of betrayal that makes you question your own judgment, wonder what else you might have missed in other relationships, other friendships. But at least I know I wasn't crazy. At least I trusted my instincts enough to drive to that address instead of just accepting a flimsy excuse. And at least Jake's paying for it now, in every way that matters. My girlfriend Sarah had this way of making me feel like I was losing my mind. Every time I asked about her late nights at the office or the weekends she suddenly needed to spend with friends I'd never met, she'd flip it on me. She'd say I was being paranoid, that I was controlling, that my insecurity was ruining our relationship. And for a while, I believed her. I started questioning myself. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe I was the problem. We'd been together for 3 years, lived together for 2. I thought we were solid. Sure, she'd been distant the past few months, but people go through phases, right? Work gets stressful. Life gets busy. I tried to be understanding. I tried to give her space. But the more space I gave, the more she disappeared. She'd come home at 11, midnight, sometimes later. Always with an explanation that sounded plausible, but felt just slightly off. A work dinner that ran long, drinks with her college roommate who was in town, her phone dying so she couldn't text. The thing that really got to me was how defensive she'd get when I'd ask simple questions, not even accusations, just things like, "How was your night?" or "Who'd you go out with?" She'd immediately go on the offensive, tell me I was smothering her, that I needed to trust her more, that healthy relationships didn't involve interrogating your partner every time they left the house. And I'd apologize. Like an idiot, I'd actually apologize for caring where she was, but something in my gut wouldn't let it go. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, I don't know. I just knew something was wrong. So one night after she'd come home at 1 in the morning claiming her phone had died again, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked our shared phone plan online. We'd been on the same family plan for years to save money. I'd never had a reason to look at the detailed usage before, but that night I logged in and pulled up her call and text logs, and there it was, hundreds of texts and calls to one number, multiple times a day, late at night, early in the morning, calls that lasted 30, 40 minutes. This wasn't occasional contact, this was constant communication with someone I apparently didn't know about. I copied the number and ran it through one of those reverse lookup websites. The name that came back was Marcus Henderson. I felt my stomach drop. Marcus, her cousin Marcus. The guy I'd met exactly twice in 3 years, once at a family barbecue where he barely said 2 words to me, and once when he supposedly stopped by to drop off something for Sarah while I was at work. She'd mentioned him here and there, always casual, always in passing. He was family, so I never thought twice about it. Except now I was thinking about it, and none of it made sense. Why would she be texting her cousin hundreds of times a day? Why would they be on phone calls at midnight? I searched through my memory trying to remember what she'd said about him. She'd always been vague. He was her mum's sister's kid. They'd grown up close. That was about all I knew. I spent the next 2 days going quietly insane. I didn't confront her. I didn't say anything. I just watched. And the more I watched, the more the pieces fell into place. The way she'd angle her phone away from me when texting. The way she'd take calls in the other room. The way she'd smile at her screen sometimes. This little private smile like she was sharing a secret with someone. I knew I needed proof. Real proof. Not just phone records and a bad feeling. So I did something I never imagined I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The PI was this middle-aged guy who'd done 20 years as a cop before going private. He didn't judge, didn't try to talk me out of it, just took my money and got to work. I gave him Sarah's info, her schedule, the phone number. He said he'd have something for me in a week. He had something in 3 days. The photos were exactly what I didn't want to see but knew I'd find. Sarah and Marcus at a hotel downtown. Different hotels, actually. The PI had timestamps and locations for 6 different meetups over the course of the week he'd been following her. They'd go in together, stay for a few hours, leave separately. He also had photos of them at Marcus's apartment, which apparently wasn't across town with his family like Sarah had mentioned once. It was 20 minutes from our place. He'd followed them there twice, got pictures of them kissing in the parking lot before going inside. The PI's report was thorough. Hotel receipts going back 6 months that he'd pulled from public records, text message metadata showing the pattern of communication, Photos of them together at restaurants I'd never been to. Everything documented and timestamped. He'd even interviewed the hotel staff at one location and confirmed they were regulars. Came in every Tuesday night like clockwork. 6 months. She'd been doing this for 6 months while coming home and calling me paranoid. I paid the PI his fee and asked him to put everything in a folder. Printed copies of everything. Photos, receipts, text logs, timeline. Then I waited for the right moment. That moment came on a Thursday night. Sarah texted me at 6 saying she'd be late. Work thing. I texted back saying no problem. Then I went home, laid everything out on the kitchen table in neat rows, and waited. She walked in a little after 11. I was sitting at the table with the lights on and all the evidence spread out in front of me, like some kind of crime scene investigation. She froze when she saw it, actually froze mid-step, her keys still in her hand. "What's this?" she asked. Her voice was careful, controlled. "You tell me," I said. She walked closer, looked down at the photos. I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. Pictures of her and Marcus, hotel receipts with her name on the credit card, text records showing thousands of messages between them. Her expression went from confused to panicked to defensive in about 5 seconds. "This is insane," she said. "Did you hire someone to follow me? Do you know how crazy that is?" "Oh, so we're doing that now. I'm the crazy one." "Just tell me the truth," I said. "That's all I want. The truth." She tried to deny it at first, said the photos were taken out of context, that Marcus was going through a hard time and she was helping him, that the hotels were just places to meet because his apartment was too depressing, that I was seeing what I wanted to see because I'd never trusted her. I just stared at her, didn't argue, didn't engage, just let her talk herself into corners until she realized I wasn't buying any of it. Then she switched tactics, admitted they were close but insisted they were just friends, that nothing physical had happened, that I was overreacting to a friendship because I couldn't handle her having male friends. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say that again," I said. That's when she broke, started crying, said yes, they'd been together. Yes, it had been going on for months, but it was my fault. I'd driven her away. I'd been distant and cold, and she'd needed someone who actually paid attention to her. Marcus understood her in ways I never could. She'd never meant for it to happen, but it did. And maybe it was for the best because clearly we weren't working anymore. I let her talk. Let her say everything while my phone recorded every word. When she was done, she looked at me like she expected me to either forgive her or explode. I didn't either. "You need to move out," I said. She laughed, actually laughed. "This is my apartment too. The lease is in my name. You've got a week." Her face changed. "You can't just kick me out. Watch me." And here's where it gets absurd. She tried to flip the script one more time. Said if I kicked her out, she'd tell everyone I'd been abusive. That she'd been planning to leave anyway because I was controlling and paranoid and she'd been scared of me. That Marcus had been helping her escape. I held up my phone. "I have you on recording admitting to the affair and blaming me for it. I have 6 months of evidence. I have hotel receipts and text records and photos. Try me." She left that night, packed a bag and went to Marcus's place, I assume. I didn't care where. The next morning, I sent the recording and a selection of the evidence to her parents, her sister, and our mutual friend group. The same people she'd spent months telling I was the paranoid, jealous boyfriend who didn't trust her. The same people who'd probably been judging me behind my back while she played the victim. The response was immediate. Her mom called her. Her sister called her. Friends started reaching out to me, asking if I was okay, apologizing for not seeing it sooner. Sarah's carefully constructed narrative collapsed in about 6 hours. She moved out within the week, took her stuff while I was at work, left her key on the counter and nothing else. No apology, no explanation beyond what she'd already said. Just gone. It's been 4 months now. I've rebuilt my life, got a new place, started seeing a therapist to work through the gaslighting because that's what it was. Gaslighting. She'd spent half a year making me doubt my own reality, making me feel crazy for noticing things that were absolutely happening. The therapist says that kind of manipulation leaves scars, and she's right. I still second-guess myself sometimes, still wonder if I'm being paranoid when something feels off, but I'm getting better, and I'm definitely better off without someone who'd rather make me doubt my sanity than just be honest. Sarah can have Marcus. They deserve each other. I deserve someone who doesn't make me feel insane for expecting basic honesty. Digital breadcrumbs can expose anyone. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected message. I was sitting at my desk on a random Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from someone I didn't know. The profile picture showed a woman around my age with dark hair and a bright smile. Her name was Alex. I almost ignored it, figured it was spam or someone trying to sell me something, but the preview text caught my eye. I think you should know your boyfriend is also my boyfriend. My stomach dropped. I opened the message and found myself staring at screenshots. Lots of them. Text conversations between Alex and my boyfriend Dean. Photos of them together at restaurants, parks, his apartment. Timestamps that lined up with nights he told me he was working late or hanging out with his buddies. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized, like she'd been preparing a court case. I sat there for a solid 10 minutes just scrolling through everything she'd sent, feeling my reality crack apart one screenshot at a time. Dean and I had been together for almost a year. We talked about moving in together. I'd met his parents, and apparently the entire time he'd been running the same playbook with someone else 2 hours away. I messaged Alex back, asked her how long they'd been together. She said 7 months, 7 months of overlap with our relationship. She'd had no idea I existed until she'd done some digging after getting suspicious about his constant work trips and weekend plans that never included her. We started comparing notes, and that's when it got really disturbing. Dean had used the exact same excuses with both of us. The same stories about his demanding job, his sick grandmother, his buddy's bachelor party that kept getting rescheduled. He'd taken us to the same restaurants just on different weekends. He'd even used the same pet names, called us both Sunshine, sent us the same good morning texts, word for word. It was like he had a script he was following, just swapping out names. Alex was furious, but in this controlled, methodical way. She said she'd suspected something was off for weeks but couldn't prove it until she found an old photo tagged on Instagram that led her to my profile. That's how she connected the dots. I asked if she thought there might be others. She said she'd been wondering the same thing. We spent the next few hours going through Dean's social media like detectives. His privacy settings were pretty tight, but there were cracks. Tagged photos from mutual friends, check-ins at locations, comments from people we didn't recognize, and that's how we found Rachel. Rachel was in a photo from 3 months ago at some brewery, tagged by one of Dean's co-workers. She was standing close to him, his arm around her waist. The caption called them a cute couple. Alex messaged her. Rachel responded within an hour, and yes, she was dating Dean too. Had been for 4 months. She lived in the same city as me, just on the opposite side of town. Dean had somehow been juggling 3 women in 2 cities, and none of us had known about the others. The 3 of us started a group chat. It was surreal, bonding with 2 strangers over the shared experience of being lied to by the same person. But there was something cathartic about it too. We weren't alone in this. We had witnesses. We had proof. And we had each other's backs. Rachel suggested we confront him together. At first, I thought it was too dramatic, too confrontational, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked the idea. He'd played us all. Why shouldn't we present a united front? We coordinated everything down to the minute. Dean had told each of us he was busy that Saturday afternoon. We decided that's when we'd show up at his apartment, together. I drove over with Rachel since we both lived in the same city. Alex met us in the parking lot. We stood outside his door for a moment, just looking at each other, and I remember thinking how absurd this all was. 3 women who'd never met until this week, about to confront a man who'd lied to all of us with disturbing precision. Rachel knocked. We heard movement inside, footsteps approaching. The door opened. The look on Dean's face when he saw all 3 of us standing there was almost worth the heartbreak. Almost. He went completely white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He actually took a step back. Alex spoke first. Calm, measured, terrifying. She said we knew everything, and we were here to make sure he understood exactly how thoroughly he'd been caught. Dean tried to stammer out an explanation, started with denial, then moved to excuses, then landed on some pathetic attempt at apologizing. But we didn't let him finish. We'd agreed beforehand that we weren't there for his excuses. We were there to tell him it was over. All of it. With all of us. I showed him the screenshots Alex had sent me. Rachel showed him the photos she'd found. Alex calmly listed every lie he'd told her, every excuse, every time he'd chosen one of us over the other, without any of us knowing we were in competition. He kept trying to interject, to explain, to somehow make this make sense. At one point, he actually said he'd never meant to hurt anyone, like he'd accidentally fallen into 3 simultaneous relationships through no fault of his own. Imagine being this confidently wrong. Rachel cut him off and told him we were done, all 3 of us, and if he tried to contact any of us, we'd make sure everyone in his life knew exactly what kind of person he was. Then we left, just walked away while he stood in his doorway, looking like his entire world had just imploded. Because it had. The 3 of us went to a coffee shop and sat there for 2 hours, processing everything. It was weird. We'd all been dating the same person, competing for his attention without knowing it, and now we were sitting together like old friends united by shared trauma. That should have been the end of it. We'd confronted him, made our boundaries clear, and moved on. But Dean wasn't ready to let it go. The messages started that night. Apologies at first, long rambling texts about how he'd made a mistake, how he cared about all of us, how he wanted to make things right. When none of us responded, the tone shifted. He got angry, started accusing us of conspiring against him, of ruining his life, of being vindictive. Alex blocked him immediately. Rachel and I followed suit, but he found other ways to reach out, created new social media accounts, sent emails, even showed up at Rachel's workplace once, which was the final straw. The 3 of us filed for a group restraining order. I didn't even know that was possible, but apparently when multiple people are being harassed by the same person, you can coordinate legal action. The judge granted it without much hesitation, especially after we showed him the evidence of Dean's escalating behavior. That seemed to finally get through to him. The messages stopped, the drive-bys ended. He disappeared back into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. And here's the unexpected part. Alex, Rachel, and I became actual friends. Not just trauma-bonded acquaintances, but real friends. We still have our group chat. We get together every few months, celebrate each other's wins, support each other through tough times. Rachel got engaged last year to someone who actually deserves her. Alex moved to a new city for her dream job. I've been seeing someone new for a few months, and yes, I've been way more careful about red flags this time. We joke sometimes about how Dean inadvertently did us a favor by being such a spectacular disaster. He showed us exactly what we didn't want, and in doing so, brought 3 people together who genuinely care about each other. The trash really does take itself out sometimes. It just needs a little help from a coordinated effort and a restraining order. But what happens when your ex won't let go and decides to destroy you instead? After my ex Tyler and I broke up, I expected some awkwardness, maybe some passive-aggressive social media posts, the usual post-relationship pettiness that everyone goes through. What I didn't expect was a full-scale smear campaign designed to completely destroy my reputation. It started about 2 weeks after we ended things. We'd been together for 3 years, and the breakup was messy but not catastrophic. I'd caught him lying about where he was spending his nights, confronted him, and he'd gotten defensive and mean. We'd had a big fight, said things we probably shouldn't have, and called it quits. Standard breakup stuff. I figured we'd both move on. Then he started posting screenshots. The first one showed up on his Instagram story, a text conversation that was supposedly between us, where I'd said some truly vile things about his family, called his mother names I wouldn't even type out, made fun of his sister's weight, stuff that made me sound like an absolute monster. The screenshot looked real. It had my contact name, my profile picture, the right color scheme for my phone's messaging app. Everything looked legitimate. I stared at it in complete confusion because I'd never sent those messages, never even thought those things, let alone typed them out. But there it was, screenshotted and posted for hundreds of people to see. I texted him immediately asking what he was doing. He didn't respond. Instead, he posted another screenshot. This one showed me supposedly admitting to cheating on him multiple times. Graphic details about hookups that never happened with people I barely knew. Again, it looked completely real. My phone started blowing up. Friends asking if it was true. Mutual acquaintances sending me angry messages calling me disgusting. People I'd known for years suddenly treating me like I was some kind of monster. I kept trying to explain that I'd never sent those messages, that something was wrong, but nobody believed me. Why would they? The screenshots looked real. Then came the breaking point. Tyler posted a third round of screenshots. These ones were worse. They showed me making racist comments about his coworkers, saying things that were so far beyond anything I'd ever think that I felt physically sick reading them. And he didn't just post them to his story this time. He shared them in group chats. He sent them to my freelance clients. He tagged me in posts on Twitter and Facebook with these fake screenshots, making sure everyone in both of our social circles saw them. Within 48 hours, my reputation was completely destroyed. I lost 3 freelance clients who said they couldn't work with someone who held those views. Friends I'd had since college blocked me without asking for my side of the story. My own cousin sent me a message saying she was ashamed to be related to me. People were sharing Tyler's posts, adding their own commentary about what a terrible person I was. The screenshots were spreading faster than I could even keep track of. I sat in my apartment watching my entire social life implode in real time, and I realized something. Tyler had planned this. This wasn't a heat of the moment thing. He'd created these fake screenshots deliberately, carefully, and released them strategically to cause maximum damage. He was trying to destroy me. But here's the thing. I knew I'd never sent those messages, which meant they had to be fake, which meant there had to be a way to prove it. I contacted a digital forensics expert. Cost me $800 I really couldn't afford, but I didn't have a choice. I sent her my phone, my actual text history with Tyler, and copies of all the screenshots he'd posted. I explained the situation and asked if she could prove they were manipulated. She called me back 3 days later. The screenshots were absolutely fake. She could see the editing artifacts, the metadata inconsistencies, the places where text had been altered or inserted. Tyler had used photo editing software to create fake text bubbles, insert them into real screenshots of our conversations, and made them look authentic. He'd even matched the font and spacing almost perfectly. It was sophisticated work. He'd clearly spent time on it. She put together a full forensic report documenting every piece of evidence that proved the screenshots were fabricated. Metadata showing when the images were created versus when the conversations supposedly took place. Analysis of the pixels showing where editing had occurred. Side-by-side comparisons of real screenshots from my phone versus his manipulated versions. It was thorough and damning. I also pulled my actual phone records from my carrier. They showed every text I'd sent and received with timestamps. None of the messages Tyler had posted existed in those records, because they'd never been sent. I spent 2 days putting together a response. I wasn't going to just make a vague post saying it wasn't true. I was going to systematically dismantle every single lie he'd spread. I created a detailed document with side-by-side image comparisons. Tyler's fake screenshot on the left, my actual phone records, and the forensic expert's analysis on the right. For each set of fake messages, I showed exactly how they'd been manipulated. I included portions of the forensic report, highlighted the metadata that proved when the images were actually created, and provided my carrier's official records showing those texts never existed. I wrote a calm, factual explanation of what had happened. No emotional appeals, no begging people to believe me. Just cold, hard evidence that Tyler had systematically fabricated screenshots to destroy my reputation. Then I posted it everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I tagged every single person Tyler had tagged when he'd spread his lies. I tagged every mutual friend who'd blocked me. I posted it in every group chat I was still part of. I made sure it reached everyone who'd seen his fake screenshots. And here's where it gets absurd. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up again. But this time, it was apologies. People who'd called me horrible things were now apologizing, saying they should have asked for my side, saying they felt terrible. Friends who blocked me were unblocking me and sending long messages about how shocked they were. The post was being shared almost as widely as Tyler's original lies, except now people were sharing it with captions about how manipulative and psychotic he was. Tyler's response was to delete everything. His Instagram went private, then disappeared entirely. His Facebook account vanished. His Twitter was deactivated. He tried to run and hide, but the damage to his credibility was already done. Screenshots of my post were everywhere. People were talking about what he'd done in groups and forums he had no control over. And then people started really turning on him. Several of our mutual friends reported him to his employer with copies of my evidence, pointing out that someone willing to fabricate screenshots and run a targeted harassment campaign was probably not someone their company wanted representing them. He worked in marketing, and his job was heavily dependent on his professional reputation. From what I heard through the grapevine, he was fired within a week. People in the online community where he'd posted some of his fake screenshots reported him to the platform administrators. He got banned from several forums and groups. Someone even filed a report with the police on my behalf, though I'm not sure anything came of that. The momentum of public opinion had completely reversed. The same people who'd been eager to believe the worst about me were now eager to condemn him. And honestly, watching it happen was satisfying in a way I didn't expect. He'd tried to turn everyone against me, and instead he'd turned everyone against himself. I considered pursuing legal action, defamation, harassment, fraud. My forensics expert said I had a solid case, but ultimately I decided public exposure was enough. His reputation was destroyed, his social media presence was gone, he'd lost his job, he'd lost his credibility with everyone who knew both of us. He'd wanted to destroy me, but he'd destroyed himself instead. People still apologize to me sometimes, friends who believed the screenshots without question, who jumped to conclusions, who participated in the pile-on. Some of them I've forgiven, some of them I haven't, because while Tyler created the lies, they were the ones who spread them without asking questions. They were the ones who assumed the worst about someone they'd known for years, based on some screenshots from an angry ex. I learned a lot from the whole experience, about how easily people believe what they see online, about how quickly a reputation can be destroyed, about how important it is to verify before you share, and about how sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just the truth. Tyler's still out there somewhere, probably trying to rebuild his life under a new name or in a new city. I don't know, and I don't care. I got my reputation back. I got my life back. And I have a detailed forensic report proving exactly what kind of person he is if I ever need it again. Some betrayals are calculated and cold, especially when someone weaponizes what you trusted them with most. I used to believe that vulnerability was strength, that opening up to the person you love, sharing your deepest fears and insecurities, was what built real intimacy. I told Eric everything, my childhood trauma, my anxiety, the things I worked through in therapy, the parts of myself I was ashamed of, the moments that still kept me up at night. He always seemed so supportive, so understanding. He'd hold my hand and tell me it was safe to share with him, that he'd never use any of it against me. Then one night during an argument, he turned every single vulnerable thing I'd ever told him into a weapon. We were fighting about something stupid. I don't even remember what, but it escalated, and suddenly Eric wasn't just angry. He was cruel in a way I'd never seen before. He brought up my past trauma and mocked it. He referenced specific things I'd said in therapy sessions I'd told him about, twisting them to make me sound pathetic. He called me damaged goods. He said no one else would ever want someone as broken as me, that I should be grateful he'd stuck around this long. I just stood there, frozen, while he systematically dismantled every piece of trust I'd built with him over 2 years. When he finally stopped, when he ran out of ammunition, he just looked at me with this cold expression and left. Walked out of my apartment like he hadn't just destroyed me. I spent that night crying on my bathroom floor, replaying everything he'd said, wondering how someone who claimed to love me could be so calculating in their cruelty. But then something shifted. Through the hurt, I started feeling something else. Suspicion. Because the way he'd done it felt practiced, too smooth, too deliberate, like he'd been planning exactly what to say, exactly where to hit for maximum damage. So I started digging. I went through his social media, his email that I had access to from shared accounts, anything I could find. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for at first. Then I found a folder on his laptop labeled Client Notes. Eric was a therapist, licensed and everything, but these weren't client notes from his practice. These were notes about women he'd dated, pages and pages of documented vulnerabilities, fears, traumas, names, dates, detailed summaries of what they'd shared with him and how they'd reacted to different manipulation tactics. There were notes about me in there, everything I'd ever told him, organized and catalogued like I was a case study. And there were notes about 5 other women, some from before me, some overlapping with our relationship. He'd been dating multiple women simultaneously, extracting their deepest vulnerabilities, then using that information to control them. The clinical detachment in his notes was chilling. He'd written things like, "Subject responds well to guilt-based manipulation," and "Triggering abandonment fears yields compliance." He was using his professional training as a therapist to systematically abuse women. I felt sick reading it, but I kept going because I needed to know how deep this went. I found a support group online for survivors of emotional abuse and posted vaguely about my situation, asking if anyone had experienced something similar. Within days, I connected with two women who dated Eric. They'd been through the exact same pattern. He'd love bombed them, gotten them to open up about their trauma, then used it against them when they tried to set boundaries or leave. One woman said she'd been in therapy for years trying to recover from what he'd done to her. Through those two women, we found three more. 6 of us total, all with eerily similar stories. He'd used the same tactics on every single one of us. The same supportive act in the beginning, the same extraction of vulnerabilities, the same weaponization when we stopped being useful to him. But that wasn't even the worst part. One of the women did some digging and found Eric's Facebook profile that he'd kept private from all of us. He was engaged, had been for 8 months, to a woman named Sarah who had no idea about any of us. No idea what kind of person she was planning to marry. Her profile was full of happy couple photos, wedding planning updates, comments from friends congratulating them. We all felt the same sickening realization. He was doing to her what he'd done to us, and when she finally discovered the truth or tried to leave, he'd have months of her vulnerabilities documented and ready to use against her. We decided right then that we couldn't let that happen. We had to warn her, but we also had to make sure Eric faced real consequences this time. So we got organized. We created a comprehensive document with all of our testimonies, screenshots of his notes about us, timelines showing he'd been dating multiple women simultaneously. Everything. We corroborated our stories, compared the manipulation tactics he'd used, built an airtight case. Then we sent it to Sarah. We also sent it to his employer and his licensing board, because Eric wasn't just some regular guy being a terrible boyfriend. He was a licensed therapist using his professional skills and training to abuse vulnerable women. That's not just unethical, it's illegal. Sarah called me after she received the document. She was crying, in shock, but also angry, really angry. She said she'd noticed small things that hadn't quite added up, but Eric had always had explanations. She'd been in therapy herself for depression, and he'd been so supportive, so understanding. Now she realized he'd just been collecting information. She broke off the engagement immediately, sent him a text that just said, "I know everything," with no explanation, and blocked him everywhere. She told us later that he'd tried to show up at her apartment, tried to contact her through friends, even sent flowers with a note about how she was overreacting. Classic abuser playbook. The licensing board investigation moved faster than we expected. Turns out when 6 women come forward with documented evidence that a therapist has been using his professional training to manipulate and abuse people, they take it seriously. They suspended his license pending a full investigation. His employer, a group practice, fired him within a week. Then came the breaking point for Eric's carefully constructed life. 2 of the women filed civil lawsuits against him for emotional distress and intentional infliction of harm. Sarah joined them. The evidence from his own notes, the documentation we'd all gathered, made the cases pretty straightforward. Eric tried to claim the notes were from a research project, that he hadn't actually done anything illegal, that we were all just bitter exes, but you can't really explain away detailed instructions on how to manipulate specific women using their documented traumas as a research project. Eric started a harassment campaign, sent threatening emails, tried to discredit us online, contacted our employers with lies, but we'd anticipated that. We'd documented everything from the start, every interaction, every threat. We got restraining orders. We reported him to the police for harassment. Every move he made just dug his hole deeper. His license was officially revoked 6 months after we first reported him. The lawsuits are still ongoing, but our lawyers say they're strong cases. Eric's now working some retail job and living with his parents, according to one of the other women who occasionally checks his social media. His entire life imploded because he couldn't stop himself from being a predator. Here's what really gets me though. Eric was good at what he did. Not good in a moral sense, obviously, but effective. He knew exactly how to make you feel safe, how to earn trust, how to get you to open up. Then he knew exactly how to destroy you with what you'd given him. If I hadn't found those notes, if I hadn't connected with those other women, he'd still be out there doing this. Sarah would have married him. He would have moved on to new victims. Sometimes I think about how many other men like Eric are out there. How many people use intimacy as a weapon, collect vulnerabilities like ammunition, wait for the perfect moment to deploy them. It's terrifying. But I also think about the six of us, how we found each other, how we fought back together, how we didn't let him isolate us or make us feel like we were crazy or oversensitive. The support group we formed is still active. We check in with each other, celebrate victories, talk through the hard days. A few of us are in therapy to process what happened. Sarah's in a new relationship with someone who actually treats her well. I'm still single, taking time to rebuild my sense of trust in people. But I'm getting there. People ask sometimes if I regret opening up to Eric, if I wish I'd kept my vulnerabilities to myself. And honestly, no. What he did wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong by being honest with someone I thought I could trust. He's the one who weaponized it. He's the one who turned something beautiful, the act of being vulnerable with someone you love, into a tool for abuse. What I learned is that vulnerability is still strength, but you have to be selective about who deserves access to it. And when someone shows you they're willing to use your pain against you, you believe them. You don't make excuses, you don't give second chances. You document everything, and you make sure they can't do it to anyone else. Eric thought he was smarter than everyone, thought his training and his manipulation skills made him untouchable. But he underestimated what happens when women compare notes, when we realize we're not alone, when we decide to fight back together. He gave us all enough rope to hang him with, and we used every inch of it. Workplaces can be battlegrounds too, especially when someone decides you're the target. I started working at Meridian Financial Services about 6 months ago. It was a decent office job, nothing glamorous, but the pay was fair and my coworkers seemed friendly enough. I was the new guy, still learning the systems, still trying to prove myself. Brandon was one of the first people to welcome me. He'd been there for 8 years, knew everyone, had that easy confidence that comes with seniority. He showed me around, introduced me to people, offered to help whenever I had questions. I thought he was a good guy. Then money started disappearing from the office petty cash fund. It wasn't huge amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there, the kind of thing people might not notice immediately. But our office manager kept meticulous records, and after a few weeks, she realized nearly $300 was missing. She sent out an email asking if anyone had taken cash and forgotten to log it. No one responded. The thefts continued. That's when the suspicion started. And somehow, almost immediately, that suspicion landed on me. I'd catch people looking at me weird in the break room. Conversations would stop when I walked by. I tried to ignore it, figured I was being paranoid. But then Brandon pulled me aside one day and said, "Hey man, people are talking. Just wanted to give you a heads up." I asked what they were saying. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to tell me, but felt obligated. He said some people thought it was suspicious that the money only started disappearing after I got hired, that I was the newest person, the unknown variable. I told him I hadn't taken anything. He said he believed me, but you know how office politics are. People talk. The thefts got worse, larger amounts, more frequent, and the timing was always when I was in the office. Security footage became a topic of conversation. Our office had cameras covering most areas, including the room where petty cash was kept. The office manager reviewed the footage, but apparently there were gaps. Technical glitches, the IT guy said. The recordings would just stop for 20-minute intervals, always coincidentally during the times money went missing. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except it's not funny when you're the one being set up. I was called into a meeting with HR and my supervisor. They were professional but cold, asked me directly if I'd taken any money from petty cash. I said no. They asked if I had any explanation for why money kept disappearing on my shifts. I said I didn't. They exchanged looks. Then they told me they needed to search my locker as part of the investigation. Company policy, they said. I agreed immediately because I had nothing to hide, except when they opened my locker, they found marked bills tucked inside an old jacket pocket. bills that matched the serial numbers from the petty cash fund. I stood there in complete shock while they pulled out the evidence. I tried to explain that I'd never seen that money before, that someone must have planted it, but I could see it on their faces. They didn't believe me. Why would they? The evidence was right there. I was suspended immediately pending a full investigation. I drove home that day feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My reputation was destroyed. My job was on the line, and I was being framed for something I didn't do. I spent that entire night trying to figure out who would do this to me and why. And the more I thought about it, the more one name kept coming up. Brandon. He'd been too helpful, too friendly, too quick to warn me about the rumors, and he had access to everything. He knew the security system. He knew where people kept their locker keys. He'd been there long enough to have everyone's trust, which meant he could move around the office without raising suspicion. But I had no proof. Just a gut feeling and a lot of circumstantial evidence that pointed at me instead. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small hidden camera online, the kind that looks like a USB charging block. When I came back to the office to clean out my desk during my suspension, I installed it near my workspace, angled so it could see my locker and the surrounding area. I didn't tell anyone. I just set it up and hoped I was right about Brandon. 3 days later, I checked the footage, and there he was. The timestamp showed 2 in the morning. The office was empty except for Brandon, who apparently had a key to get in after hours. The camera captured him walking straight to my locker, pulling out a key that definitely wasn't his, and opening it. He looked around, making sure he was alone, then reached into his pocket and pulled out cash. He tucked it into the same jacket pocket where the marked bills had been found. Then he closed the locker, locked it, and walked away. But that wasn't even the worst part. I kept watching the footage. Over the next few days, the camera caught Brandon doing this multiple times, accessing my locker, planting evidence, and then, on one particularly damning recording, going into the petty cash room and pocketing money before doing something to the security camera that made it tilt away from where he was standing. He'd been manipulating the entire system, creating blind spots, framing me, and apparently doing it with enough confidence that no one questioned him. I downloaded everything and made multiple copies, put them on flash drives, uploaded them to cloud storage, emailed them to myself. Then I requested a meeting with HR and came prepared with a lawyer. The lawyer was a friend of a friend who agreed to sit in on the meeting as a favor. I didn't need him to say much. I just needed HR to know I was serious. I presented the footage and told them if they didn't conduct a proper investigation, I'd be filing a lawsuit for wrongful termination and defamation. You could see the color drain from the HR director's face as she watched the video. She called in the head of security and the IT department. They verified the footage was authentic and unedited. Then they started pulling more records. And here's where it gets absurd. Brandon had been doing this for years. They found discrepancies in the petty cash going back almost 3 years. They pulled employment records and found 2 other employees who'd been fired for theft during that time, both newer hires who'd maintained their innocence. Brandon had been stealing from the company for months at a time, then framing new employees to cover his tracks when people started noticing the missing money. I was his 3rd victim. The company fired him immediately and called the police. He was arrested at home that same day. They found over $15,000 in cash at his apartment that he couldn't explain. Turns out he'd been skimming from multiple sources, not just petty cash. Expense accounts, vendor payments, anywhere he could shave off a little without raising immediate red flags. The 2 previous employees he'd framed were contacted and offered settlements. The company wanted to avoid a lawsuit and the bad publicity that would come with admitting they'd wrongfully terminated people based on evidence planted by a long-term employee they'd trusted implicitly. I was offered a settlement too, and an apology, and my job back with back pay for the time I'd been suspended. I took all of it. But I also made sure they knew exactly how badly they'd failed. They'd trusted the wrong person. They'd ignored the possibility that someone with seniority could be the problem. They'd nearly destroyed my career because it was easier to believe the new guy was guilty than to question their system. 3 months later, they offered me a promotion. Brandon's old position, actually. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took it. Figured I'd earned it after everything he'd put me through. Brandon pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud. He's serving time now, and from what I heard, he'll be in there for a while. The company overhauled their security systems and implemented new checks and balances to prevent this from happening again. and I installed my own cameras at my new desk just in case. Trust, but verify and all that. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the people who seem the most trustworthy are the ones running the most elaborate cons. Brandon spent years building credibility just so he could exploit it. He was patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. And if I hadn't trusted my gut and gathered my own evidence, I'd probably still be out of a job with a ruined reputation. The previous two employees he'd framed both reached out to thank me. One of them had been unemployed for months after being fired and blacklisted in the industry. The settlement helped, but the damage to their careers was already done. Knowing that made me even more determined to see Brandon face real consequences. Sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones stabbing you in the back. My boss Richard started making my work life hell the moment I rejected his advances. It wasn't even subtle. One day we had a normal professional relationship, and the next, after I politely declined his invitation to dinner that was clearly not about work, everything changed. Projects I'd been leading for months suddenly got reassigned to less experienced colleagues with no explanation. Meetings I'd always been included in were scheduled without me. My ideas that had been praised weeks earlier were now dismissed as impractical or poorly thought out. It was like I'd become invisible, except when he needed someone to criticize in front of the team. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was reading too much into normal workplace dynamics. But then the performance reviews started. Richard wrote that I was missing deadlines, which was false. I had timestamps on every deliverable proving I'd submitted everything early or on time. He claimed I wasn't a team player, despite the fact that I'd helped 3 different colleagues with their projects that quarter. He said my work quality had declined significantly, even though my metrics showed I'd exceeded every target by at least 15%. I sat in that review meeting listening to him list criticisms that had no basis in reality, and I realized this was deliberate. This wasn't about my performance. This was retaliation. So I started documenting everything. Every email, every project reassignment, every meeting I was excluded from. I kept a detailed log with dates, times, and witnesses. When Richard gave my work to someone else, I saved the email chain. When he made snide comments in team meetings, I wrote down exactly what he said and who was present. I became meticulous about creating a paper trail. I also started talking to my coworkers quietly, carefully. Turned out I wasn't the only one who'd noticed Richard's behavior. Several people confirmed they'd seen him treat me differently after that dinner invitation. One colleague even admitted Richard had bragged to him about putting me in my place for being too ambitious. 6 months of this. 6 months of watching my career stall while less qualified people got promoted. 6 months of being undermined and gaslit. And then came the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. I'd exceeded every metric, hit every goal, gone above and beyond on multiple projects. By every objective measure, I'd earned that promotion. When the announcement came that it was going to someone else, someone who'd been with the company half as long and had half my results, I knew it was time to escalate. I filed an official complaint with HR, brought all my documentation, emails, performance data, witness statements from coworkers, a timeline of events starting from the dinner invitation I'd declined. I laid it all out for the HR director, expecting at least an investigation. Instead, I got dismissed. The HR director barely looked at my evidence before telling me there was no proof of any wrongdoing. He said personality conflicts happen in the workplace, and sometimes people just don't get along with their managers. He suggested I consider whether this role was the right fit for me. Translation: shut up or leave. That's when I started digging into why HR was so quick to protect Richard. Took me about 2 weeks to find the connection. The HR director, the guy who just dismissed my complaint without a real investigation, was Richard's brother-in-law. They'd been family for over a decade. The HR director had been at Richard's wedding. Their kids went to the same private school. The system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. I realized going through internal channels was pointless. They were protecting each other. So I went above them, way above them. I spent the next month compiling everything into a comprehensive report. 6 months of documentation. Emails showing Richard explicitly reassigning my projects to others with no justification. Performance metrics proving I'd exceeded every target while receiving negative reviews. Testimony from 4 different co-workers about his harassment and retaliation. Evidence of the family connection between Richard and the HR director. Screenshots of the HR director's dismissive response to my initial complaint. I organized it all chronologically with an executive summary, supporting evidence and clear documentation of the conflict of interest in HR. Made it look like a legal brief because I figured that's what would get their attention. Then I sent it to everyone who mattered: the CEO, every member of the board of directors, the company's legal team. I didn't CC Richard or the HR director. I wanted them to find out the same way I'd found out about losing my promotion. Suddenly and without warning, the response was immediate. Within 48 hours, I got a call from the CEO's office requesting a meeting. The legal team wanted to interview me. An external investigation was being launched. Richard was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. The HR director was suddenly unavailable for comment. The external investigators were thorough. They interviewed everyone I'd listed as a witness. They pulled email records going back years. They reviewed every performance metric and project assignment. And that's when they found the pattern. I wasn't the first. I wasn't even the second. Richard had been doing this to women in the company for years. There were at least 5 other cases of women who'd rejected his advances or filed complaints, only to see their careers mysteriously stall. Some had left the company. Others had been pushed into lesser roles. All of them had gone to HR, and all of them had been dismissed by the same HR director who was married to Richard's sister. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The investigators presented their findings to the board. Richard was fired immediately, not asked to resign, not given a severance package, just terminated for cause with documentation of his pattern of harassment and retaliation. The HR director was forced to resign. He tried to fight it, threatened legal action, but the company's lawyers made it clear they had enough evidence to bury him if he pushed back. I received a formal apology from the CEO, a settlement that included back pay for the promotion I should have received 6 months earlier, the actual promotion with an adjusted title and salary to account for the delay, and a guarantee that the company would implement new policies to prevent conflicts of interest in HR investigations. But here's where it gets absurd. Once the news got out internally that Richard had been fired for harassment and retaliation, 3 other women came forward. Women who'd left the company years ago because of him. Women who'd stayed quiet because they thought no one would believe them, or because they'd been told to move on. We all connected, compared stories. The patterns were identical. He targeted women who rejected him or who he perceived as threats to his authority. He used his position to sabotage their careers. He relied on his family connection in HR to shield him from consequences. He'd been doing this for over a decade. We're now part of a class action lawsuit against the company, not just for Richard's actions, but for the systemic failure to address them, for the HR department that actively covered up harassment complaints, for the culture that allowed this to continue for years. The company's trying to settle quietly. Their lawyers have reached out multiple times with offers, but we're not interested in quiet. We want accountability. We want policy changes. We want to make sure this can't happen to anyone else. My career recovered. I got my promotion. I'm actually being considered for a director-level position now. But the bigger win is knowing that Richard's reputation is destroyed. He can't get a job in this industry anymore. Too many people know what he did. His professional network has dried up. Last I heard, he was working at some small startup in a completely different field, starting over from scratch. The HR director didn't fare much better. He lost his job, his professional reputation, and apparently his marriage. Turns out his wife wasn't thrilled to learn he'd been covering up her brother's harassment of multiple women for years. She filed for divorce 6 months after everything came out. I still work at the same company. Some people think that's strange, that I should have left after everything that happened. But I stayed because leaving would have felt like letting them win. Instead, I'm here as a reminder that retaliation has consequences, that documentation matters, that you can't bury the truth forever. I also stayed because I want to be here when the next person faces harassment. I want them to know they're not alone, that the system can be challenged, that fighting back is possible. The other women from the lawsuit and I stay in touch. We've become advocates for better workplace policies, better harassment training, better HR accountability. We speak at conferences. We consult with companies on how to build systems that protect employees instead of protecting predators. Richard wanted to ruin my career because I rejected him. Instead, I exposed a corruption network that had been protecting harassers for over a decade. He destroyed his own life, his brother-in-law's career, and his sister's marriage, all because he couldn't handle being told no. Corruption often runs deeper than one person. Sometimes it's the whole system, but systems can be dismantled when enough people refuse to stay silent. After my boss sexually harassed me at work, I did what you're supposed to do. I filed a formal complaint with HR, documented everything: dates, times, witnesses, specific incidents. I walked into that office, handed over pages of detailed accounts, and trusted the system to protect me. The HR representative, a woman named Patricia who'd worked there for 15 years, nodded sympathetically. She promised a thorough investigation. She said they took these matters very seriously. She told me I'd done the right thing by coming forward. Weeks passed, nothing happened. My boss didn't get pulled aside for questioning. There were no follow-up interviews with the witnesses I'd named, no changes to our work arrangement. In fact, he got bolder, started making more comments, stood closer than necessary when reviewing my work, made jokes about how I looked in certain outfits. It was like filing that complaint had made him feel invincible, like he knew nothing would happen to him. So I filed a second complaint, added the new incidents to the original documentation, walked back into Patricia's office and put another stack of papers on her desk. She gave me the same sympathetic look, the same reassurances, the same promises of action. Still nothing. I started requesting updates, sent emails to HR asking about the status of my investigation, got vague responses about things being under review, about processes taking time, about the importance of being thorough. Corporate speak that meant absolutely nothing. 3 months after my first complaint, my boss cornered me in the break room and made a comment so explicit that I walked out of the building and didn't come back for 2 days. I was scared, I was angry, and I was done trusting that HR would do anything. That's when I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for my employment records. The company was partially funded by state grants, which meant certain records were subject to public disclosure. I requested everything: my personnel file, any complaints filed, any investigation notes, all of it. What I got back was illuminating in the worst possible way. My complaints didn't exist, not officially. There was no record of either complaint in my file, no investigation notes, no interview records, nothing. The detailed reports I'd submitted to HR had never been officially logged into the system. Patricia had taken my complaints, promised action, and then apparently shoved them in a drawer somewhere and forgotten about them. Or not forgotten, hidden. I dug deeper, started going through public records, Glassdoor reviews, former employee testimonials on sites where people warn each other about toxic workplaces, and I found a pattern that made my blood run cold. This had been happening for years, 7 years to be exact. Maybe longer, but that's as far back as I could document. Dozens of complaints from employees about harassment, discrimination, safety violations, wage theft. All of them submitted to HR, all of them buried. Some of the reviews mentioned filing complaints and then being pushed out of the company shortly after. Others talked about retaliation that HR ignored. It was systematic, it was deliberate, and it had been going on long enough that it had to be policy, not just negligence. The HR department wasn't protecting employees. They were protecting management. I contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in employment law and had a reputation for taking on corporations. I showed him everything I'd found: the missing complaints, the pattern of buried reports, the public records showing a trail of former employees who tried to report problems and been silenced. He took the case immediately. We started reaching out to former employees, people who'd left under questionable circumstances, people who'd mentioned HR complaints in their exit reviews, people who'd been brave enough to leave negative Glassdoor ratings with specific details. We found 15 people willing to provide testimony, 15 people who'd filed complaints about everything from sexual harassment to racial discrimination to managers falsifying safety reports. 15 people whose complaints had disappeared into the same black hole mine had. But that wasn't even the worst part. As we built the case, we discovered that several members of the HR department had financial ties to upper management. Patricia's husband worked in the same department as my boss. Another HR rep was the sister-in-law of a VP. They weren't just protecting management out of corporate loyalty. They were protecting their own family members and friends, using their positions to bury anything that might cause problems for people they cared about. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't incompetence, it wasn't bureaucratic slowness, it was calculated, systematic protection of abusers and lawbreakers at the expense of everyone else who worked there. My lawyer and I compiled everything into a comprehensive file: testimony from 15 former employees, documentation of dozens of buried complaints, evidence of the personal relationships between HR staff and the managers they were protecting, a timeline showing 7 years of patterns, proof that the company had violated numerous labor laws and their own stated policies. Then we went to the media. I reached out to a local investigative journalist who'd done stories on corporate malfeasance before, gave her everything. She spent 2 weeks verifying our findings, conducting her own interviews, getting statements from legal experts about the severity of what we'd uncovered. Then she published. The story went viral within hours. Local news picked it up, then regional news, then national outlets started covering it as an example of systemic workplace corruption. The article detailed specific cases, used real names of HR employees and managers involved, and included statements from former employees describing how their complaints had been buried. It was damning and thorough and impossible to ignore. The company tried to do damage control, issued a statement about taking the allegations seriously, about launching an internal review, about their commitment to employee safety, standard corporate crisis management. But it was too late. The story had momentum, and public outrage was building. The State Labor Board launched an investigation within a week. They had subpoena power, which meant the company couldn't hide behind confidentiality agreements or internal policies. They pulled records, interviewed current and former employees, examined the HR department's procedures. What they found confirmed everything we'd reported, and then some. Things went from bad to unhinged. The investigation revealed that the company had been systematically violating labor laws for years, not just burying harassment complaints, but also misclassifying workers to avoid paying overtime, ignoring safety violations that had resulted in injuries, and retaliating against employees who tried to unionize. The HR department had been actively complicit in all of it, helping management cover up problems instead of addressing them. The entire HR department was dissolved. Patricia and 3 other HR employees were fired immediately. Several managers, including my former boss, were also terminated. The company faced fines that totaled well into 6 figures. They were put under regulatory oversight, meaning the Labor Board would be monitoring their practices going forward, and they had to implement completely new HR procedures with external auditing. My lawyer negotiated a settlement for me that was substantial enough that I could afford to never work for that company again. Several of the other former employees who provided testimony also received settlements. The company was bleeding money and credibility. I left with more than just money, though. I left knowing I'd helped expose something that had been poisoning that workplace for years. The culture had been toxic because people in power were protecting each other instead of doing their jobs. And now that whole structure had been torn down. Some of the employees who'd stayed with the company reached out to thank me. They said the workplace culture had already started changing. People felt safer reporting problems. New HR staff were actually responsive. Management was being held accountable. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had been. I can't say burning it all down felt good, exactly. The whole process was exhausting and emotionally draining, but it felt necessary. That company had been hurting people for years, and nobody in a position of authority cared enough to stop it. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to dismantle it completely and force people to rebuild something better. My former boss tried to get another job in the same field. As far as I know, he's still unemployed. His name is permanently attached to the news stories about the scandal. Patricia apparently moved to another state. I hope she's not working in HR anymore, but I have no way to know. I think about the people who came before me sometimes, the ones who filed complaints that disappeared, the ones who left because they couldn't fight the system alone. If even one of them is living better now because of what happened, then it was worth it. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth might be buried, but it's never truly gone. Someone's always watching, documenting, and waiting for the right moment to expose everything. If these stories taught us anything, it's that karma has receipts, and revenge is best served with evidence. Until next time, sleep tight, and maybe check your attic before you do. Stay safe out there.